I'm Ben Bates, and you are?
Matt Rainwater.
Okay, Matt. So we met, I think 11, 12 years ago now,
Yeah.
back at Periscope. And since then, we haven't really talked. Like, I haven't really kept track of what you've been doing. And so it was exciting to come back and find how much you've accomplished since. So for example, the last thing that I remember specifically back then was that you had a concept for a character that I believe was the Trailer Park Warlock.
Yeah.
Would that sound right? Was that
Yeah.
idea?
I remember working on that sketchbook. Like I remember keeping a sketchbook at that time, and I vaguely remember you looking through it, because you were just curious, as to
Yeah.
what I was working on at the time, and because I was working on a whole other project that I ended up, it was like that ended up being like a 700-page thing that me and my friend that I was writing with, we never finished. That was called Garage Raja. And that was you actually. I'm totally going into tangent mode, but you had given me really interesting feedback that I still remember today
Mm.
because you had looked at one of my characters and you're like, "Oh, I like this design, but I'm having a hard time conceptualizing it three-dimensionally." And that got me thinking because I was like, "Oh, okay." Like, because the way that I was thinking at that time was very like 2D animation,
Yeah, yeah.
very like especially I see this nowadays in 2D animation where they don't even think two-dimensionally about it. It's just like, yeah, we're going to have this face shift, and we're just going to make it work. And you got me thinking in a way where I was like, oh, you know what? I I never really thought of it that way. But anyway,
Well, actually, no.
so
Let me jump in because what's
yeah,
exciting here is that we have the chance to follow up after such a long period of time, where I get to find out if this thing that I said was helpful or destructive, harmful,
yeah,
and so I want to explore that a little bit more in terms of because the way I thought of it always is that you can draw with a strong slant towards 2D,
hmm,
and I think of Powerpuff Girls as an example
sure,
where they're not really truly meant to work in 3D space,
yeah,
but there is an attempt to figure out how they do function if they go to a profile view or if they look up or down. Like you can
yeah,
look at some of the model sheets and it's really fun. It's like if they're flying and they lift up one leg, into where one leg is extended, one leg is brought up, as a knee, like the sort of classic superhero flying pose.
yeah,
How does the bottom of the dress function around the thigh? Like all this sort of stuff. Whereas
right,
they're not treating them as 100% 3D objects, but they are figuring out like, all right, how does this, what is our in between? And so in that way,
yeah,
that's why I was brought that up to
yeah.
back then. And so from the sounds of it, it sounds like it's not harmful per se.
Oh no, it wasn't harmful to me
Okay,
at all.
great,
I
great.
mean, I don't I do think that I have always veered towards very 2D heavy
Hmm.
mode of drawing, but over time, and I think you planted what I would say is you planted a little seed that has over time given me sort of an expectation for myself of like, okay, maybe I'm not gonna like like in Trailer Park Warlock, there's a lot of heavy like it's still very heavily 2D
Yeah.
oriented. But as time went on and as I started developing more of a style, I started thinking more and more about like, okay, but how do I think about these characters inhabiting an environment? And I think that's what it really influenced for me was thinking about how do these characters inhabit the environment, and that got me thinking about the environment more too,
Oh,
which
good. Yeah,
has,
yeah, yeah.
I mean, for me, has become kind of a big topic because, um, particularly with webtoons, I have noticed that partially this is due to the intense turnaround of webtoons.
Mm.
A lot of artists they will go just directly into Google SketchUp and they're not really putting a lot of thought into their environments, and you can really tell, and it's
Yeah.
kind of off-putting a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
In For me, like I think I tried to stick as hard as I could to making sure that those environments and those characters mesh together. And like that may mean that sometimes maybe the environments look a little clunky sometimes, or like maybe the perspective isn't 100% like accurate,
Right.
but it feels like my work, if that makes
Oh,
sense.
yeah.
Like it
Absolutely.
feels like it's all of a part. And that's sort of like when I'm making that criticism about, the Google SketchUp mode, it feels like there's a disconnect where it's like you see the artist style and then you see this whole other style that's
which frequently
overlaid.
is going to be, very lifeless, all right? Because
Yeah.
it's just a 3D model with every angle is 100% accurate, and there's not maybe especially if the artist isn't going in and adding in the
Yeah.
lived-in details, you know. But
Yeah.
let's pause right there because I do want to get to that, but let's take a step back. Because ultimately, I don't know a lot of your I didn't know a lot of your history back then, and then especially what's transpired in the decade.
Sure.
So, oh, and I should say, part of what I'm doing here, exploring. This is still early days with doing these interviews. That I'm going specifically for a creator-owned trajectory. That's what I want to find out about.
Yeah.
And so. One of the things that I think would be cool to explore is where does comic books come into your life? Like, when do you first learn about comics or manga? When does it
Sure.
enter into your
Oh
life?
yeah. Gosh. Okay. So it's interesting too because when I met you, you were working on the Sonic the Hedgehog comics for
Yeah.
Archie, right? Well, Sonic the Hedgehog was my gateway
Oh.
into comics.
Okay,
So for me, it was like, oh shit, like I can't believe like this is a weird kind of full circle thing to where I get into comics. I draw Sonic the Hedgehog all the time as a kid, like I have a sketchbook that was entirely devoted to this idea of like I played Super Mario RPG and I was like, well, what if we did that with Sonic the Hedgehog? And so I had an entire sketchbook of like enemy designs and all this other stuff.
That's awesome. Do you still have that?
I think it got lost in a flood.
Bummer.
Because I had a bunch of sketchbooks that got lost in a flood, unfortunately.
Jeez, a flood. That's way more
Yeah.
intense than just losing it. Yeah.
It was a lot of stuff that got lost, sadly. The fortunate part is a lot of my Trailer Park Warlock original art was salvaged, but it was a lot of like old sketchbooks from way back when. But yeah, so I would say that was my first step into comics, and I didn't really get into, I would say, like the larger scope until probably high school, I would say. And I think that was around the time that Rising Stars of Manga started. So Tokyo Pop, and all that whole saga. That got me really interested into manga, and that became my inroad into the wider world, right? Because then I got into Osamu Tezuka, and that was it. Like that, for whatever reason, Tezuka like opened up something for me that I did not think was possible in comics, because his voice was so broad. He tried to cover every single possible topic he could imagine. Yeah. And for me, I was like, it just never occurred to me. And the way he did it was like in this very cartoony voice, right? Where it was like imagine watching a Disney cartoon, but it's talking about really heavy themes about, death and rebirth. And not that there aren't Disney cartoons that don't cover that, but in the way that Tezuka covers it, where it's like, he gets into heavier philosophical topics at points, which for me in high school is like, well, this is a lot, And so that opened up other gates where I started exploring. And so that ended up being like Frank Miller, Alan Moore, Grant Morrison. Alan Moore was a really big opening point for me because, that started that like point of like, oh, serious, I think everybody who gets into comics gets into that mode at one point or another for a couple of years, where they're just like wanting to make super serious comics about super serious topics in like, very adult sort of themes and stuff. But Alan Moore, even after that period of time, Alan Moore really stuck with me because his voice was so particularly unique and so particularly his own. He is one of those artists who I find, I guess here's the best way I can put it. I've been following his work for probably, I don't know, since art school. So that was probably 2008. right? 2009. And he finished League of Extraordinary Gentlemen with the book The Tempest. So that was the very last League book that he had written. And with that, he pretty much announced that he was done with comics, right? So there's this huge, like, I don't know, there's a certain point in Alan Moore's like writing where he starts to almost become a little bit journalistic, where he's kind of putting his life into it in bits and pieces. And then he wrote a prose novel. I mean, it took him 10 years to write this novel, but he wrote a prose novel called Jerusalem. And that was the last work of his that I've read. And it's his most... It's not autobiographical, but it's as close to autobiographical as you're going to get with him. And at that point, by the time that I finished reading that book, I was like, I think I know this artist too well. Like, he's done his job too well, to the point where I'm like, there's parts about this person I don't like, and there's parts about this person I'm endeared by. And I had kind of this weird, like, after I finished Jerusalem, I had this weird sort of artistic breakup with Alan Moore, where I was just like, I'm done. Like, I don't need to read any more Alan Moore stuff. Like, I've had my fill, you know?
So what year would have that been, do you think?
Well, that breakup happened about 2 years ago.
Okay.
That was when I finished Jerusalem. It took me 3 years to read that book. It's a dense book. It's about 1,300 pages long. It goes into like really weird trajectories. Like, he tries to describe like a concept of the afterlife that's almost like mathematically accurate, and it's just weird. It's a weird book. There's a lot going on. And I say this having really loved the book, but like I said, like, it was one of those things where I got too much of the artist to the point where it's like, I need distance from you and like whatever your deal is. But that's been a really interesting experience for me in terms of my like artistic growth, because it's this point where I've kind of come from, oh, here's this person who I kind of had as a role model, and I'm getting to this point where I'm not equal. I don't feel like I'm equal with Alan Moore as a creator, but I'm at this point where I'm like, I'm going to go traverse on my own and not rely so much on like what your work means to me, if that makes sense.
Sure, I think so, yeah.
Because I think... Go ahead. Yeah.
No, I was going to say... No, finish your thoughts on that thing.
All I was going to say was that, because I think this happens with all artists where we kind of have heroes, right? We have role models, we have heroes, we have people that we put above ourselves. And I think that that's an important part of that growth process. But another part of that process is also coming to that point where you kind of go, it's not like a challenge. It's more like I'm just going to like go on my own now. Like, you've taught me what you can teach me. I have learned what I could learn from you. And now it's my turn to make my own mistakes and like come to my own conclusions as an artist.
Okay, so you just went a massive stretch of time, because we
I know it's really broad.
I want to jump back and explore a little bit of the moments there. So
sure.
you do you remember the first Sonic comic that you came?
Oh yeah, it was probably, I still have that issue too. I think it's issue number 3.
Oh, really early then?
Yeah, it's super early. The first one that I remember like being obsessed with was Mecha Madness, which I'm pretty sure you're familiar with.
Yes.
Like, that was the comic where that was the first comic where like I was trying to redraw the cover, you know, and like redrawing Mecha Sonic and Mecha Knuckles like obsessively, basically.
Okay, when you discovered issue 3, was that in the actual like publication? Like, you were there when 3 was on the shelves?
Yeah.
Or you came. Okay. So
yeah, it was on the shelves.
And then Mecha Madness comes around, I think issue 39 or something like that, somewhere around that.
Somewhere around there, yeah.
So you consistently read Sonic all the way up through there?
See, that's my memory gets a little fuzzy, because I know that I think what happened. So I got that first issue of Sonic the Hedgehog because an aunt and uncle had gotten me like a gift card for Christmas to a local comic book shop, right? And so my mom takes me to the comic book shop to look around, and mom's like, no, you can't buy this, you can't buy that. It's like X-Men and stuff like that seemed too adult for me at the time. But what I was able to pick up was a Scrooge McDuck comic, Ren and Stimpy, and then Sonic the Hedgehog. Now, I read all of those, like, back to front, but Sonic the Hedgehog was the one that I kept going back to the most. And that was the one where, because this was at the time when they were still selling comics in the grocery stores.
Yeah.
So, like, I would pick up, I remember I would pick up issues when I went to the grocery store with my mom and I saw an issue that I hadn't gotten already. So I'd pester my mom and be like, oh, there's a new Sonic the Hedgehog comic. Can I get it? And so I know that was the beginning. And then it was before 39. I want to say it was probably, oh gosh. I remember it leading up to Mecha Madness where I was starting to, like, every month be on it.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And it was around that time where I was like pestering my mom to take me to the comic book shop directly to get issues, because I knew I couldn't rely on the grocery store having exactly what I needed in terms of, like, linearity. And I was, it took me, I don't know how many years it took me to pick up on that, right? It was, I mean, looking at the timeline, we could say, let's say I started at 3. It was probably 2 years, let's say, by the time I was picking up on, like, oh, this is how this system works, And so it was after, I know it was after 25, because I had to go back to get 25. So it was probably around 29-ish, 30-ish, and then Mecha Madness started, and then that's when I was, like, all in. Like, I was all in for a really long time, probably until right around until they started incorporating, like, the Dreamcast game stuff into it.
Yeah. Okay.
So that was kind of when they were starting to veer away from, like, the Ken Penders type storylines and, like, veer away a little bit more from all the Knuckles, the Echidna stuff.
Yeah.
Which I really liked. I actually really liked those storylines. A lot of people didn't like the Knuckles storylines, but I was super into them. I think part of it was it gets very lore heavy.
Yeah.
And I was really into, like, the family lineage and all that other stuff, because that gave a certain amount of depth to the character of Knuckles that I found surprising for myself as a kid. And it was the only comic that I was reading at the time, really. So
that was the question I was going to have. So when you're going to the comic shop, Sonic is the only thing that you're consistently picking up around that time period, or the only thing at all.
I would say at that time it was the only thing. I shouldn't say the only thing at all, because I was also reading comic strips.
Oh, okay.
And this is something that I forget to mention, because this is actually a super important part of my own personal history, because I think I take comic strips for granted because I never paid money for them. I just read them in the truck on the way to church every Sunday morning. Like, I would just go through the entire, like, all the spreads of the funny pages, quote unquote, and, like, read every single strip. And, like, some strips I didn't care that much about, and then other strips I really wanted to read. Like, I'd read Doonesbury not knowing what the hell was going on, but I just read it just to be, abreast of, like, what that comic strip is,
Which were the ones that you recall really catching your attention back then?
Oh, I was super into Garfield for a long time. I read Peanuts pretty religiously, I would say, and then Calvin and Hobbes was another really big one. Calvin and Hobbes was the one that I went out of my way to buy collections of. Okay, I should go back and say Garfield, Calvin and Hobbes, and then Foxtrot. Foxtrot was my biggest one for a long time. Foxtrot was the one.
Foxtrot.
Okay, yeah, Foxtrot was a lot of fun, and it was like, it was more of a family dynamic comic strip, but the author of that strip figured out that, like, the nerdy rascally teenage son was everybody's favorite character. So, like, it very heavily centered on that character throughout the strip over time.
Okay, I recall seeing this, but yeah, I never read this.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun, and it was a strip that me and my friends would share collections with each other, and I had a friend who also collected Calvin and Hobbes, and we would share collections of that. And then the same thing with Farside, but Farside didn't run continuously in my newspaper for whatever reason. I have no idea why, but so the only way I was able to read Farside was basically collections that my friends had, because I didn't really know where to buy the collections. It was just kind of like, it's a weird thing about like comics in that day where it was just like things just showed up. Like people would, like they went to a bookstore in another town and they found a collection of Farside, and this was a little bit before Books a Million. It was getting into the Books a Million period, and where I grew up, like bookstores didn't really become a thing until I was around 10 or 11, I want to say.
And yet there was a comic book shop?
There was a comic book shop, but it was one of those things where it was comic book in collectibles, right? So like it was baseball cards, that kind of thing.
Okay.
That shop's still there too, to that owner's credit. Like he's managed to like keep it going.
That is surprising, yeah.
Yeah. Like he's figured out ways to like, I know he's kind of veered off into like doing more board games and stuff like that, but he's still part of the direct market. So yeah,
So where did you grow up? Where is this shop at?
This was in Lake Charles, Louisiana. The shop's called Paper Heroes, by the way. It's the owner. I'm assuming he's still the owner of the shop, Kevin. He's a great guy. Put up with me and my friends way more than I think any comic book shop owner would generally. But yeah,
that's an interesting challenge. Where I grew up, two small towns, one in Texas, one in Wyoming, and there just wasn't a consistent comic shop. When I very first moved to Wyoming, there was a shop there, but it disappeared pretty quickly. But the few times that I went into that shop, I remember a certain level of intimidation being a kid.
Oh yeah,
And,
no,
yeah.
I relate to that. I relate to that a lot because I think part of it too for me as a kid, and I don't know what your experience around this is, but as a kid, my parents were very very careful about what I was exposed to, and so if it seemed like at all potentially lewd, particularly lewd, like too much exposure of midriff, breasts, whatever. Inviolate. Like my mom was like really big about trying to like protect my virgin eyes from violence of any kind. Even though they let me have an issue of Spider-Man 2099, so I don't know. I could never make sense of like what their how their rating system worked. It was just like what happened was like, during that speculative boom in comics, friends bought me comic books because they're like, oh, well, it could be worth something one day. Not realizing, like, I just wanted Sonic the Hedgehog comics. So it was just like, Archangel, what's this? Spider-Man, what's that? I don't know. Okay. Like, they just sat on my shelf for years, and I never read them until,
interesting, yeah.
Until, middle school,
Okay, so this is part of, based on what you had said earlier, what I was... It sounds like, because you're not even really looking at those, but once you start looking at them, and when does manga enter into your worldview exactly?
That was probably freshman year of high school, so I was around 14, 15. Yeah.
So you aren't for me, I started with American comics, and then I found manga, and I cut American comics off entirely, and only later in life did I reopen the doors to American comics. But it sounds like you open, oh, here's this thing. You didn't cut one off or the other. You didn't abandon.
I mean, not really. I've actually gotten a little bit more that way recently. Actually, I've gotten more. I should say I've cut off American comics a lot recently. And that's just I think that's largely because I don't get good recommendations, and I don't even know what to look for right now because it feels very anarchic. Like it compared to, you know, what I was talking about growing up, where it was just like you knew where to look, and now it's like I don't even know where to look. I just kind of like respond to whatever shows up on my feed nowadays.
And when you say when you knew where to look, do you mean like by going to the grocery store, by going to the comic book shop? Is that what you mean by know where to look?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, because like I go to Barnes and Nobles to check out stuff, and I flip through books there, but it's harder for me to make the commitment to buy something nowadays because it's going to take up space on a shelf, right? It's really more that nowadays more than anything else. And so now I think about when I'm thinking about buying a book, I'm like, okay, how do I feel about the art? How do I feel about how the story is going to turn out? You know, and I oftentimes see so many stories that are very cookie cutter in format, you know, where it's like I don't really want to do the same, like, you know, rising action blah 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 kind of storyline. Can you just give me a story that's somebody's unique voice, you know?
Okay, so let's because that's deep.
Yeah, that's veering off.
Let's put that to later. So in regards to you know, you're starting with Sonic, manga, a wider variety of the, let's just say the mainstream American comics are in your worldview as you get a little older. When does your idea that you want to make comics enter into your consciousness? When does that?
I mean, I was drawing strips when I was at least in third grade. So like I'd been doing a lot to the point that there was like an assignment in fourth grade that a teacher gave us where it's like, teach the class something. And so like I taught the class how to like write and draw a comic strip, basically. It was just like a 3-panel comic strip. It was really basic. And I'd gotten to that point where I was stapling together comics with just, you know, like sketch paper and stuff, you know.
Right.
And
like
I had actually
like 8.5 by 11 by 1/2 and stuff.
Yeah. And like I'd actually like made a comic for a Pixar artist who had came to visit in my hometown. His name was Ralph Eggleston, and so allegedly he was from like the area. I guess either Moss Bluff or Lake Charles, that area. And my art teacher was like, "Hey, Matt, you should draw a comic for him because he has like a character." I can't quite remember the full story, but I think it was something like she had recommended something about there was a character called Eggman or something. I don't know. I don't. My memory of it's not very good, but I just made like a comic about this character called Eggman, and like he received it. I don't know what he did with it afterward, right? This very crudely drawn comic where Eggman like saves Woody and Buzz Lightyear and the other toys from Toy Story. So yeah, it started in elementary, and then I had this moment of time during high school. Let me track back. I'm jumping ahead a bit, but elementary through middle school, I was drawing my own little personal epics that I never really shared with anybody. You know, I still have those. Like there's still like shelves somewhere in my mom's house. Like I went to go visit her for Thanksgiving, and I was just like looking through them and reading through them, and it was interesting to read because there was a lot of stuff where I was like, okay, clearly like I was watching some sort of anime at this time, you know, and I was like taking ideas from Final Fantasy and whatever, because there's like, you know, crystals, and I'm like going into like each crystal represents this and that and all that kind of stuff. But then there were like funny jokes that like came out of nowhere, and like stuff where it's like there's like this one character who gets in trouble because he reads a conspiracy on the internet. Like that's the entire plot line. I was like, this is weirdly like prescient in a way. Like it's really weird, the kind of stuff that like childhood brain comes up with, because it's not consciously putting it out in the same way that you do as an adult. It's just like you're kind of reflecting what you get from culture, and it's completely unfiltered.
Yes,
right?
Yes. All right, so real quick, with your
Yep.
when you're teaching that strip to your class, your third grade, I think.
Mhm.
You, did you is this your own observation of how comic strips works that then you're then teaching, or did you have some sort of did you see a book? Did you see some
Oh,
was there some
sure.
sort of guidance that said
Yeah, that's
this
a great
is
question. Because I did have, oh gosh, who? I'm gonna say it was Stan Lee who wrote it. Heavy rabbit ears on that, but it was like drawing comics the Marvel way, I
hmm.
believe. Um, I say this because I remember there's a big image of Ben Grimm like on the cover, and there's like a whole tutorial on how to draw the thing, and there's a big tutorial on like drawing structure and stuff, and if I remember correctly, it does break down a little bit on like comic book structure, like comics paneling structure, very very briefly, you know. But I do remember having that book in looking through it, reading through it, and like looking at the tutorials. Now, how well do I remember it? Not that well, obviously, but like it was certainly a book that I know I at least read through once or twice for sure.
And so that's giving you a little, at least some of your own personal observations plus that structure into what you're potentially showing other people. This is how. Okay, so
Yeah.
and when it comes to the epics that you were making, I'm curious if you have any memory about how you went about creating those. Like, did you diligently finish storylines, or did you start something, abandon it, start the next thing?
Uh, I I'm trying to remember because, like I said, I read through it Thanksgiving, and it's stream of consciousness as best as I can put it, where it's just like there is a kind of a linear plot line, and you can kind of see how everything follows each other. But then like characters will just come in out of nowhere where I'm just like introducing a character without any kind of like pacing or anything. It's like, oh, here's a new character, by the way, like they just show up, or like romances start sort of unbidden completely or unannounced. Yeah, I mean, I would say that I did try and deliberately finish the plot line as best as I could at that time. Um, and I should say, like, there were phases because I remember fifth grade, the phase was more because I was watching a lot of like Freakazoid and Animaniacs,
Hmm.
so everything was very episodic and self-contained. Um, and then sixth grade onward, that was when I got into Dragon Ball Z and Robotech. So like that was clearly when the big sprawling storylines begin, right? And the epic that I wrote at that time was called Geotech. Actually, that was for both fifth and sixth and seventh grade. It was all called Geotech, but it like in fifth grade it was like Freakazoid type episodic goofy stuff happens, and then sixth, seventh, eighth grade it became like kind of serious ish like anime, like kind of standard. I would almost say standard like shonen kind of storyline.
This is fascinating because I didn't. I didn't do that. I didn't write. I wanted to. I tried.
Yeah.
But there were the my ambition for story was so outstripped my abilities, and so I would quickly stumble, and so I never got very far. So the fact that you for years and like you said you're not sharing these with people. This is something you're doing on you're not sharing with
Yeah.
friends anyway. This is something you're
I'm kind of sharing, like, my friends were aware of it, and I would try and show it to them, and they would read through it a little bit, but it was kind of one of those things where it's like, oh, hey, check this out. They would look at it, oh, cool. And then, I'd go back to drawing more, and
But this is
I,
really cool because so part of what impresses me, as back in Periscope, you say you got this idea for potentially what I assume was a comic, with Trailer Park Warlock, and then I look and I see that you've completed Trailer Park Warlock. By 10 years later, you have done the project. And it's not that this is coming out of nowhere. This is something that you've been doing from a young age, where you're honing your craft of writing and drawing your own stories. Now, let's say in 7th, 8th grade, you're doing these things. Are you aware that you want to do this for a living at this point? That in the future, or rather, let's say you want to do this when you get older. You want to hone this craft. Is that something you're aware of?
I'm aware of it. I don't know if I understood that concept fully, because there was a big shift that took place between 7th and 8th grade, where I was suddenly trying to design RPG storylines. So Final Fantasy VII became the thing on everybody's tongue, and I actually never played that game. I just watched my friends play it.
Interesting.
I basically watched the game get played front to back 3 or 4 times, and so I basically that was Let's Play before Let's Plays were a thing. It was just I'm sitting on my friend's bed while they grind through Final Fantasy VII for the umpteenth time, and it definitely got into my brain from all those watch throughs, where I was like, oh, I want to write some kind of storyline like this, right? And so between 8th to, I want to say, junior year, I was in this mindset of designing characters and designing storylines with the idea of this will one day be a video game. Once again, this was still Geotech. It was just it was this placeholder name title with the same characters, but they completely changed genres through the years. And then there was a really big shift that happened. And this is when I started really thinking about, I do want to become, I want to do this as a career.
Okay, so when is that moment?
This is junior year.
Okay.
And what had happened was Cowboy Bebop came out. And this was really the beginning of the big sort of Toonami surge, right? Cowboy Bebop comes out, and there's a bunch of Fully Cooley is another one that was hugely influential on me. And those were I would say Fully Cooley probably more so was the one where I suddenly started thinking about, I want to do this as a career. And I don't know what it was. It's really difficult for me to figure out what it was about Fully Cooley in particular. It's, I think, just the wildness of that show, the unpredictability of it, the general weirdness of it was something that struck me in such a way where I felt my own weirdness could be potentially fit or a TV show or a comic book or something.
So I mean, part of what we have here is that you're starting with comics, then you're thinking, I'm going to design for video games. Now you're seeing an anime. And so when you say, I want to do this as a career, is it clear to you that I want to go into animation at that moment? Or are you thinking, all right, I need to do comic books with my sensibilities? When you say I want to do a career, is it specifically aimed in one direction?
The direction it's really it was a shotgun direction, where I was just I'm just gonna write stories and draw pictures, and hopefully somebody with money will come along and be like, oh, you're the person to do this, right? It never occurred to me that you have to functionally have things that formats, a plan, things like that. That didn't occur to me until I went to art school. But basically, I would say the most functional thing that I was doing at that point was I was starting to write scripts. So that was the point in which I was thinking about storylines from the perspective that I would say nowadays, oh, that actually is functional and makes sense. I could actually share that with somebody, and they could look at that as a thing to pay me for, right? Because I was still not at that point of drawing comic pages in a way that was, I would call, functional. That didn't happen until 2009, I would say.
Okay. So you're writing a script, though. How do you know that like, did you see something of how scripts looked or worked? Did you do some research, or
I
did
must
you?
have, yeah, I must have read a book, but I cannot remember what book it was.
So you are trying
Some,
to look at you looked at something and you're trying to
yeah.
replicate that where it's at least formatted in a way that.
Well, you know what? What else happened was, I did do a couple of Flash animations in high school, and so basically, me and my friends did this thing called the Mega Man Pizza Show, and
Hmm.
it was like we were basically just kind of we were taking a lot of ideas from Space Ghost Coast to Coast, right, and then just using Mega Man instead of Space Ghost,
Gotcha.
and there were like plot lines in it and all this other stuff that happened, and I animated the whole thing on my own, but like I had to write a script for my friends to do the voice acting with, right? And that was I know that that was where that began. I cannot remember though where I learned to do any script writing. I think as far as I can remember, I think I was just kind of guessing
Hmm.
like I'll just write down briefly what's going to happen to give my friends an idea of like what they're trying to act, and then you know, name of the role, and then here's the line, right? So like that was I did 2 episodes of that, so it didn't go very far, but like
Nonetheless, though,
uh,
that's impressive.
I um I had gotten into recording of the second episode and then I'd done like like it was like a parody of the Cowboy Bebop intro that was at the time very impressive to me and my friends, but there was some sort of glitch in Flash that I could not figure out how to correct. And being in high school, I just kind of gave up and
Hmm.
like moved on. And there's a part of me that's like, there's like this alternate timeline that like veered off at that point because like I could have easily gone further into that animation timeline had I had a little more like resilience. But it was such a lot of work that I was just like, I'm just gonna focus on something else.
And what is that
And
something else then?
that something else was I had a comic book storyline idea called Mercenaries and Matches. And it was just like I mean it was literally just like a Cowboy Bebop clone. Like that was all I mean it was the idea was about a private detective who lived in sort of like a sort of it was like a retro futuristic thing where there's robots and the idea was like he owned a match store as like this vintage thing
Hmm.
because in the future like matches were kind of considered like luxury items at that point. I don't remember what the logic was in the world building, but he was also like his side hustle was that he was a mercenary as well, like he was a bounty hunter.
So you're
And
coming out of the Flash animation with your Mega Man stuff, where you're starting to write scripts. So when you come back to this, would you have, because it's based on Cowboy Bebop, at the time, would you have referred to this as a comic or a manga? Would you make that distinction between how you would
I was
describe it?
calling it a comic.
Okay, so
And my main reasoning for that was like, well, I'm American. I guess that's why I'll call it. I'm a comic book artist. If you're Japanese, you're
you're
a
making the
manga
manga, yeah.
artist. Yeah.
So when you're coming to this now, are you writing scripts for yourself? Are you structuring it in some way?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I was writing scripts. I was writing scripts too because at the time there was an artist who I wanted to work with, and she drew like 2 pages of it, and then it kind of fell apart for various
Hmm.
reasons. Part of the reason was like I had a crush on her, and like I was just really awkward, and like it was just it was like several bad ideas at once, right? Um, but it was one of those things where it just kind of fell apart, and I moved on to this other title that would later become Garage Raja. And so like I would also note that junior year was specifically important for me because it was the first time I started drawing like human characters.
Mm.
Because up till that time I was drawing mostly like I was drawing like robots. I was drawing a lot of like furry type stuff, Sonic the Hedgehog influence. And very little like there was like 1 or 2 human characters that I drew ever.
Well,
And go
let
ahead.
me just explore the way you think of it real quick, because I think of just to see where we're at. With
Yeah.
this thing. So for me, having discovered Sonic the Hedgehog a little later than you, because issue 25 was the first one I ever saw. And then, after a while learning about the Uncle Scrooge comics and stuff like that, I have and Bucky O'Hare. Do you know Bucky O'Hare at all?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
So to me, when I think of Sonic, Bucky O'Hare, Uncle Scrooge, I put that under a category of funny animals, meaning
Yeah.
that when you use the word furry,
Yeah.
that does not include those
It
characters.
does have a very specific context. I do think of it all as furry because it's kind of as a derogatory a little bit.
Gotcha.
Because a part of me is just like, I would describe myself as furry adjacent, where it's like,
okay.
Clearly this is part of it's in my psychology. I love drawing like animals. I love drawing funny animals. Like, it's fun for me. It's entertaining. And that comes from having enjoyed, the Disney Robin Hood, enjoying Sonic the Hedgehog, all the like checklist stuff, right? Yeah. Like, I would say like I'm on that checklist, other than I don't have like the amorous type aspects, right? Like, but everything else is like, oh yeah, I love like, and I think that is a good way of putting it, funny animal stuff. Like, I love anthropomorphic type like drawings. It's interesting, it's unique. There's something I do think that there's something sort of like psychologically interesting that goes into it that is probably, I would say, connected to some deeper aspect of human psychology. What it is, I could not say, but like,
I mean, and this is a whole topic. I think we could do a deep dive there, but let's not do that.
Yeah.
So
right.
I just wanted to quickly see if there was a distinction why you're using certain terms. So in terms of you're starting to draw humans, and you're thinking, I want to do this as a career. You're incorporating new elements, and all of this is incredibly impressive for where you're at, because I was struggling so much during that time period where I didn't do any of this stuff, right? I didn't consistently create my own storylines. I did not write scripts. I wasn't practicing. The only thing I was doing was drawing a lot. So when you graduate high school, and I'm assuming you graduated high school, is that correct?
Yeah.
You obviously go to school, some art school. Did you go to SCAD? Is that correct?
Yeah, I went to SCAD.
Okay, so
that was after a year of like going back and forth between several other colleges. But yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, when you're graduating high school, do you know that I want to go into higher education at that point?
I was basically forced into it. I mean, I say forced. My grades are really good in school for reasons I can't figure out, because I didn't pay any attention. I was drawing the whole time, and I still look back and I'm like, I don't understand how I was able to make those grades. But like, there's a million different things I could speculate on. But anyway, my grades were good enough that I was able to like get like scholarships pretty without any difficulty. Now I did get a scholarship at SCAD. It only covered part of it, right? But I'm sorry, what was your original question?
So my question is that you want to go to a creative career.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, the moment... So, for me, going to school, you're just naturally like, okay, one grade goes into the next. And it has nothing to do with you. You're just following orders, basically.
Yeah.
And then when I graduated high school, because of where I was at, and up in the middle of nowhere, Wyoming, suddenly it occurred to me, I was like, wait a second, I have to take control of my life now? I have to be the one that drives me towards my goal? I thought it would just happen, as it has the rest of the time. And so I had to start making choices. And what I'm curious about is... you want to go to a career, but you still have to... Now you're in the position where I have to make a choice. Mm-hmm. How am I going to get there? And so you're kind of, as you said, you're forced into higher education, but is the direction still... Are you controlling it to try and say, I know I need to go towards my goal? Or are you... Yeah,
I mean, picking SCAD was definitely part of that. Like, I think that was the first time... So... I'll backtrack a little bit and say, my first year in college, I went to LSU. So that's Louisiana State University. And I was deliberately like, I'm going to get into an art program. What was available at that time, that was competent at all was graphic design. And so I was like, okay, this is semester 2, so this was a year in. I went into the graphic design program, and I quickly learned, like, I didn't like it. I didn't like what they wanted you to do. It was all abstract stuff. You didn't really... There's no, like, storytelling aspects. There was not really... It was just, like, how do you grab the attention of a viewer's eye? Stuff that's actually really important looking back, right? But, like, at the time, it just wasn't, like... I didn't feel like I was engaging in storytelling. I wasn't engaging in, like, drawing characters or thinking about scripts or things like that, right? And so I was in one of my professor's, like, offices. She had just had a couple of students in to, like, just chat and hang out. And there was a catalog for Savannah College of Art and Design that was just, like, sitting on a table, and I just thumbed through it and looked through it, and I was like, oh, I wonder if they have, like, an animation program. I looked through that, and then I also see they have the sequential art program. I was like, oh, whoa, like, maybe I should consider this as a possibility. Because it was quickly becoming apparent to me, like, the two routes that I could go in at LSU, given its degree program, I could either go through illustration and painting, which was very, like, traditional fine art route, or I could go the graphic design route. And I had already decided that I didn't like the graphic design route. It just felt too rigid, and it felt too it just didn't seem like there was any sort of room to, like, grow in the direction I wanted to go in. And I knew that I wanted to go in some sort of direction that was animation or comic books. And so when I toured at Savannah College of Art and Design, they asked, what are your interests? What do you want to do? And I told them, well, I looked at either the sequential art program or the animation program. So we toured, like, Montgomery Hall, which is, like, the big animation studio. Like, I'm sure it's gigantic at this point. It was big at the time. It was mostly geared towards 3D animation, right? And it was mostly geared towards jobs that were, like, character rigging. So, because their idea is, we want to teach students how to get a job that will make them money, and that is an easy fit right out of the pipeline, basically. And that just didn't appeal to me. It didn't seem intuitive to me, and it seemed like I would be just getting a job where I was, like, making other characters for somebody else, like somebody else's stuff. And so we toured Norris Hall, which is the sequential art department. And I don't know what it's like today, but at the time, Norris Hall was this kind of small, intimate space, and it just had a life of its own, where there's paid comic pages on the walls, stuff that students have worked on. You could just tell, like, everybody was, like, thinking really intimately and deeply about the craft and, like, very engaged in it. And I was like, okay, that's what I want to do. Like, I knew at that moment that's exactly what I wanted.
Okay. And so with the animation section, you said they had a very clear idea of making sure that you went into the industry and had a job. Yeah. Was that also clear in the comic book?
No, it wasn't. It wasn't at all. And looking back, I'm like, oh, okay, I probably should have paid a little more attention to that, to the degree of, like, well, we can get into that later on, but there are certain pitfalls that comes with sort of freelance illustration and, like, the comic book arts career, right? Like, it's not as direct, it's not as clear cut, it's not as obvious how things connect. And during my time at SCAD, like, and during my time at Norris Hall, like, I would say all of my professors did a great job at teaching me the craft and the skills that I needed. And then there was, like, very low mumblings about the career side. And I got that from, it depended on who the teacher was. There was one of my first professors, Tom Lyle, who's now passed, but he worked at Marvel, so like he had a lot of he shared a lot of his experience with what that was like, and sort of the pitfalls that he went through, because he kind of had this like whole story arc for himself where he was like doing really well in his career, making a lot of money, like making a lot of money for like a comic book artist too. I mean, and this was during the he worked during the 90s sort of speculative boom period, so page rates were really good, and he had a very, I would say it, from what I remember him describing, this was sort of probably one of the peak organization points in Marvel history. And so I got to hear a lot of the good and the bad, a lot of the warnings about like what to look out for, a lot of just like, you should be aware, like this isn't going to be the easiest thing in the world. And me being kind of being a brash college student, I'm just like, well, that's you, I'll be different. Right. And it depended, like I said, it depended on the professors. Some professors were a little more world weary and a little more like, well, here's what you should look out for. Here's what you need to know. Here's where you're going to struggle. And then there were other professors. There was another one by the name of Josh Mullins, who he was a big web comics person. And the class that he taught me was one where it's like you design your own site, you do your own self-publishing. Like it was a self-publishing centric class. And I would say like I really liked that class, but it was almost like a survey of self-publishing. So it's like, here's some web comics, here's some zines, here's some like mini comics, here's how you do all these different things. And it gave me some ideas, but it wasn't solid. Like I never really had a good solid educational course on self-publishing.
Well, let me
go ahead.
Ask you, so at this stage, while you're in SCAD, let's say, so the moment that you chose to go to, you're choosing, I'm going to go to SCAD, and then while you're in it, where do you think you are going as a career at that point? What do you see for yourself? Do you see yourself going out into the industry and trying to get a job at Marvel, DC, something like that? Or do you see, I'm going to do my thing, my story?
At that time, I thought like, oh, I'll get into storyboarding. Okay. Like, I'll get into storyboarding at some sort of animation studio. I mean, my dream job was like, oh, I'll be a storyboard artist at Pixar.
Gotcha.
Right? Not understanding at all like what was required of that and where my skill level was in comparison to that, right? Because I would say, and this is jumping ahead a little bit, but like I would say later on, I would realize like my skill level was not anywhere where it needed to be a professional artist when I graduated from SCAD. And it took me a long time to realize that. And I think part of that was, I think a lot of that had to do with the culture of the professors at SCAD needing to just like grade students based on their progress, right? And never on like, is this person like ship shape to like actually function in the professional world? And I would say also for myself, like I did have this stubborn attitude of like, well, I'm either going to self-publish my own work or I'm going to work in some sort of cushy like animation gig, right? And a lot of that had to do with me not understanding at all about how that stuff worked, and just kind of, I would say, very brashly just jumping in head first to see what would happen. Because after I graduated from SCAD, that was when I started my first serious book project, I would say. And that was called Garage Raja.
What year is this? When did you graduate?
2008.
Okay.
So I graduated from art school. At that time, I had already started doing I'd already done a bunch of mini comics that were centered around those characters. And that was actually a really interesting time because creatively, like, that was the only time where I would say I wrote stories, drew like 24-page comics that never went anywhere. Like in terms of like fully fleshed out, fully formed, and I was just like, this doesn't quite work, and I would shelve it. And it was, I mean, nowadays I think about that and I'm like, wow, that I don't have that kind of extravagance of like time and energy, right? I have to be way more deliberate about like how I'm using it. And so Garage Raja was the first time I was thinking about like actively, and that was it's like a 200, I want to say it's like a 209-page story. The very first volume of Garage Raja.
I want to lock into your mentality real quick. So you graduate school. You do not fully understand the limitations of your abilities, that they're not up to where they need to be, perhaps to enter into the industry. But you're now out of school, and you have to make choices again.
Yeah.
How are you approaching this like, how are you making this choice? Like, you're going to go and do Garage Raja, but how do you get from leaving school to that point? Where's your brain at? How do you
Yeah, so basically, like, I moved back to my hometown, moved back to my parents' house, and I was just like, I want to write a story. Do you think that y'all would be willing to put up with me living here for a little bit while I do this, right? And I just, like, my friend Austin was writing the story and I was drawing it, and so I did work on the side. I did like freelance stuff on the side, but mostly I was spending a lot of that time drawing pages. So like,
okay, there's a couple elements here
that
I wanted to dive a little further into. So one, when you say you ask your parents, will you give me the time to do this story? Where do you think are you thinking self-publishing at this point? You think you're going to try and when you finish it, you're thinking self-publishing.
I'm thinking self-publishing.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, do you work any normal jobs? You said you have these freelance gigs that are art related, but are you doing like a day job of any kind during this time?
No, I'm just doing freelance stuff. Okay. And yeah, go ahead.
Third, you, through a lot of these stories, you are writing and drawing your own material. You tried to collaborate with that girl for a little bit, but where is the decision coming in that, like, oh, I'm going to let my buddy write my story? Where does that, like, this is the first...
Oh, that started... Yeah, so that goes back into high school. I want to say that's junior year.
Okay.
Me and Asa have been friends since probably sophomore or junior year of high school. And I knew that he wanted to write, and I liked the stuff that he wrote, and we both shared kind of a similar sense of humor, similar tastes in like anime and movies and stuff like that. And we had gone back and forth on like a project we wanted to work on, and that was I guess it was about 4 or 5 years of just kind of going back and forth, spitballing projects with each other. Sometimes I would draw some stuff, and have like character designs, but nothing ever formally like solid, right?
So when does Garage Raja become, like, when do you guys... So is he on board with the self-publishing? Like,
yeah.
So you guys have talked that through, but when did that settle? Like, when did you guys form the strong idea that this is what we're going to do?
I'm trying to remember exactly when that happened, but I think I know that I was sort of the main, like, what would you say, like, instigator of a lot of that stuff, right? Because there was a point where I was like, we just really need to make something. I don't know what. Well, we just need to make something. And we both were into One Piece at the time, and so we kind of fell into the usual trap of like, let's make a giant epic thing. Yeah. Right? And Garage Raja was going to be that. And we went back and forth on so many scripts throughout art school. And I think for me, what happened was I graduated from art school. I was like, we just need to do something. I just need some kind of, I have to start building a portfolio for myself. I have to start like getting those pages in.
Yeah.
And for me, that was the impetus, and Austin went with it.
Okay, so real quick,
yeah,
with something like Shonen Jump with One Piece, you know, they're pursuing it on it's a serial storytelling where, you know, they're writing and drawing each chapter just as they go. Mm-hmm. And so when you guys decide to do Garage Raja, what direction do you think? Or you think like, let's do that exact thing, let's just write the chapter, I'll draw it, then we'll write the next chapter, I'll draw it, or are you thinking, let's do a bigger outline of our beginning, middle, end? Like you said, it's going to be 209 pages, I think, but did you know when you start the project it's going to be this big, or it's just like, let's just go and we'll see where we end up?
We just went.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, we did have we had a broad outline of the story, and basically the way it worked was we divided up the story into like chapters, and the chapters were generally about 25 to 30 pages long.
Okay.
And we would write Austin would write a chapter, I would go over it, edit it, and then just like talk with him about, okay, what do we want to stick with? What do we want to change? What needs to stay in? What needs to go out? And then I would thumbnail it, and then I would share with Austin sort of what changes I felt needed to be made at that stage, and then I would start drawing.
Is he writing full script, like all the dialogue and descriptions? Does he try to anticipate how many panels there should be on a page?
He did. There were a lot of. I often made adjustments, and because sometimes there would be stuff in the script where I would go, okay, this is not going to really work for a page. And also the way that I wanted to pace it out, I wanted to go more manga pacing, where it was like 3 panel pages kind of, or like 4 panel pages, that kind of thing. And we eventually over time sort of got each other's rhythm better, you know, but at the beginning it was very much like he would write the script, and then I would go over it and I'd be like, okay, but I'm going to change this and this and this because I don't think this is going to work out in terms of pacing. I want to hit something that's a little more cinematic, and this is like too much stuff on a page. Like that was kind of the one thing I always had to work with him, was like trying to figure out like, this is too much dialogue for one panel, so we need to like readjust some things. Like I never really like wanted to cut out dialogue. There's a couple of times where I was like, I don't know if we need this, you know. And I would say in the creative process, there were a couple of times where I sort of overstepped my boundaries and just like completely just made artistic choices and was like, I hope you're fine with this. Like, and he was like, he enjoyed that process for the most part. And I don't think he ever really had any like hurt feelings about it, you know. And I think he just enjoyed making the comic with me, and I enjoyed making it with him. It was a really enjoyable process.
Okay, that's great. Yeah. So he writes the first chapter, you edit it, you do layouts. How many chapters do you guys go through that process before you start drawing a finished page, like page 1?
Wait, say that one more time.
How many chapters have you guys, like how many layouts do you lay out a whole chapter and then start drawing the finished artwork, or do you guys do multiple chapters of layouts?
Okay. No, it was just like front to back, one chapter at a time. Okay. I think we were kind of thinking about it as like the kind of standard monthly comic layout, right? Okay. And so we would write the chapter, so script, layout, draw. I would do, you know, all the inking, lettering, all that stuff. And then I would send like the finalized, our quote unquote finalized like episode to Austin to look over. He would read it. If any kind of little changes need to be made, we'd make some changes here and there. And then we would move on to the next chapter.
Okay, but let me stop you right there, because much like a a monthly comic or the weekly Shonen Jump or something, you finish a chapter, but that chapter is then put out for consumption, for product, for sale.
Right. Okay. So that is a great thing to bring up. So what we did, because we were trying to think, we wanted to publish it as a webcomic, right? And so I was like, well, we need to make a buffer. And so I can't remember how many pages of buffer we went with, but it was a pretty substantial buffer. I think we did about, I want to say it was like 90 pages before I ever even released.
Yeah, all right.
That's cool. on the internet. And at that
you
point,
can control yourself, meaning because so many people are so excited about like, oh, I just can't wait for people to read this, and so they put it out way too early. But you were able to stay in control.
And that was something I had learned in art college. Like I had a lot of friends, our classmates who had done webcomics too, and they would talk about that all the time, about how they were like losing their buffer and how that was causing them a lot of stress and stuff. So I always thought in my mind, well, it just seems like it's a good idea if you have the opportunity. And I did have that. I was fortunate enough to have that opportunity to like have a substantial buffer and not feel the urgency of like getting it all out all at once. Right?
And when you were starting to put it out, what was your release schedule? A page a week? A couple pages a week?
It was 3 a week.
Okay. And where did you decide to, did you guys create your own unique website? Where do you decide that is the right place?
Yeah, we made our own website. Okay. It still exists, but I don't know if I want to recommend it because I'm concerned about the security of that site. Okay. I'm very I think it's fine, but I'm not 100% sure. And it's an extremely old site at this point.
Gotcha.
Right? It's ancient. And so all of that stuff now is just on my Patreon. Like I have all of the 700 plus pages of Garage Raj is now on my Patreon at this point. And so that's kind of how I'm thinking about, like, in terms of how it's being published in the moment. Yeah. Right. But on top, go ahead.
To jump back. So you got these people at school that were doing webcomics. Are they your primary inspiration, influence for how to handle the way you're going to do webcomics? Like, for example, you make a website, you've got a release schedule, and how is it part of your mindset at that point to do marketing or advertising of any kind, or are you just hoping that people slowly find your content?
Yeah, I'm just hoping that it organically works out. Now, I did do advertising through what was the name of that thing? This was long ago, but there was some kind of like web portal where you could put like web code on your site, and it all like linked to this portal, and you could like basically have banner ads, right? It was some kind of webcomics advertising portal, and I cannot remember the name of it. This is like over a decade ago now. And I did advertise on it, but it was like, I mean, it was like a couple of hits kind of a thing. Yeah. Because the way it worked, it was like tiered, where it was like you could spend X amount of money to put your, banner on this webcomic site that has, let's say, a couple thousand regular viewers or whatever, right? So I did do advertising in that way. This was before the time that I ever even thought about like networking as a thing. And that is something that, I mean, quite honestly, like I have been severely limited at in terms of taking care of myself as an artist, and something that I'm slowly working on over time.
What do you mean by that? Taking care of yourself as an artist?
I think that something that I've become aware of is that networks are a very powerful part of like how artists can survive and thrive. And I took it for granted for a really long time. And I took it as like, I think for a long time in my mindset was, if my work's good enough, you don't need a network. You don't need this or that, right? Maybe that's true, maybe that's not true. I don't really know. But I would say if you want to improve your probability, right, you need some kind of group whether that's your audience, whether that's a group of artists who also want to see you succeed, whatever that is, right? You need some group of people who have your back in
Yeah.
regards to supporting.
100%. Every job I have, whether it be comic books or animation, was due through networking. And the thing that I try to tell people is that if even with the internet, if you want to like thrive in like the animation industry, you've got to go to LA because that's where the industry is, and that's where you get to meet people and build that network up and actually be a human to them and stuff. So I 100%. I wouldn't have anything that I have if it weren't purely through networking. So I 100% agree with this.
Yeah, and so I say that as a warning to all, like I say as a warning to myself even now, and a warning to any artist listening in on that. And this is like, don't get too like full of your own ego in the sense of like you on your own are going to be able to make it happen, right? Like it doesn't quite work like that. And I mean, things change, things keep changing, it's a very dynamic system that we live in, but I say that for myself now because that's something that I'm thinking about very deliberately now, because that's the element that has been really missing. Because I've gotten to this point where I'm starting to go, okay, my artwork's actually pretty decent. I think that and my storytelling is decent. I'm at a place where I know I'm competent enough to tell a story. I know I'm competent enough to tell a story that people enjoy reading. Now the element that's missing out of that is I need to have the competent enough network for people to share it and to like allow it to proliferate, right? Like that's the thing that I think is missing for a lot of people in the arts, and that is the like factor X of like any good arts career is like what is your network like?
Yeah, absolutely. And now I think we'll get.
Yeah,
this is
that's a little ahead.
So sticking with Garage Raja, so you guys do multiple chapters. You build up your buffer. You put it out online. How much pressure are you putting on your launch? Meaning, how intense are you guys expecting views and feedback and stuff? Or are you confident and patient that like, okay, it's going to take time. Where are you at?
Oh gosh, I'm trying to remember what my mindset was like at that time, because I think there was a part of me that was like, oh, this is going to take off, this is going to be a big deal. And I do remember having a lot of people saying it's a slowly paced thing. Don't expect immediate results. Things kind of trickle in over time. And at that time, we put a lot of effort into like going to comic conventions and talking about it with people, and promoting it. And I think part of the issue with that was I was very much trying my best to promote. And then my friend Austin was, I don't know if he either didn't fully understand how to promote, or he wasn't 100% in it and felt a little like hesitant about it. And that oftentimes became sort of a point of contention between us, right? Because for me, I was like, I want to try and make this a monetarily successful thing. I want this to like really take off. And I think for him, he was more concerned about, well, are we telling a good story? Is this going to be something that I can feel proud of as an author, right? And that was one of those things that I think inevitably kind of led to our separation on that project. I mean, we still collaborated on other stuff, but on that project, we ended up like folding for various reasons. But one of those reasons, I think, was the amount of effort that went into making that comic versus sort of, for me particularly, it was a lot of effort. And I know for Austin it was a lot of effort, but it was like, if you looked at how it was distributed, it was like 75% me, and then the rest was Austin. And I think over time I felt a certain amount of like disconnect where it was like, I'm not getting the fulfillment from this that I want, and
now I'm curious. You guys ultimately produced around 700 pages for this story. Is that a completed story? It got to its end, or got
Uncompleted.
Gotcha.
Yeah, we were actually like, because we were kind of planning for it to, like One Piece, like, oh, you get to this point and it actually branches out into this much bigger world and all this other stuff. And as we were starting to get to that point, I was starting to realize, like, I'm not going to be able to do this, because that was when I was actually starting to do coloring for Plants vs. Zombies. So, like, that was around 2012, I want to say.
Okay, so that's about the time period you're going to be in Portland for the Periscope internship.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and this was a little after the internship that happened, where
okay,
well,
let me
because like,
pause you right
yeah,
there. So,
yeah,
because I want to get to the internship. So, 2008, you launch Garage Raja. You guys build it up. You work on it obviously consistently for the next couple of years. But at some point, you think, I gotta go to Portland, Oregon, to do this internship. How did that enter into your world?
For me, I was trying to get further into the comics industry, and I kept reading articles about, like, oh, Portland's, like, the cost of living's pretty low, like, and it was at the time, but when I moved there, that was, like, at the point where it was beginning to skyrocket, right? But also I was reading about how, like, there was so much of a comics presence there, and I had somebody who I knew from SCAD who was moving there, who was in comics. Cal McDonald was moving there, and, like, there's a bunch of people who was moving there, and so I was like, okay, I guess I need to move to Portland, Oregon. You know, like, that was my, there's, like, the logic behind it. Looking back, I'm like, how is this going to work out? But, like,
and are you feeling confident about Garage Raja at that moment? Like, you need to go somewhere to improve your career and your goal. But you guys,
I was feeling confident about it, and I would definitely say, like, I was beginning to hit my stride in terms of I had figured out how to keep up with my pace. I was in a place where I was experimenting and trying new things and, like, really creatively bubbling a lot. Both me and Austin were creatively bubbling a lot. I mean, this was 2011. And we were really getting into a place where we felt like we understood the story, we understood what we were doing, and I could see myself gradually improving as an artist. It was very gradual, but I was noticing myself, like, okay, I feel confident enough to do techniques that I wouldn't have done previously, do, like, really strange or outlandish page layouts, like, just really, like, really go outside of my comfort zone, you know? So, like, I felt like I had enough experience and enough of a portfolio that I could at least bring that with me to Portland. And
what
so,
do you want when you go? You know, you're working on your own thing. You know you're going to self-publish it. You are self-publishing. You're putting it online. But when you go up there, you say you got this portfolio. What's the idea? Who are you going to show it to? What do you want that portfolio to pay off to?
This is a running theme in my life where it's like, this is just where I need to go. I don't know how it's going to work out. Let's, you know.
Well, how do you learn about the internship for Periscope? How does that enter your?
Desperately looking for things in Portland to, like, either as jobs or as any kind of lead-in to a job, right? Because I was applying for so many different jobs and so many different things, and, like, getting rejections and all this other stuff. And then, like, I don't remember. Here's the part to me that does not make any sense is, like, I was like, I'm going to move to Portland, Oregon, because there's apparently a lot of comic book artists there. And I'm just going to walk into, you know, like the IPRC, or, like, there's this other, like, comic book critique group, you know. And I was just like, I'm just going to show up. You know, I'm going to show up at different places and see what works out. And then eventually, this is probably 3 or 4 months in to having moved to Portland, I found out I didn't even know Periscope was there at all. And oddly enough, Periscope was, like, really close to where I lived, because I lived downtown at the time.
Wow.
And I found out about it, and I was just like, I'll just submit my portfolio, just kind of not expect. I was just like, I don't know. I mean, who knows, right? We'll see. And then I do get, like, they wanted me to join the internship. I was like, oh crap! Like, I didn't think that would actually work out. And I had no expectation either of, like, what it was going to be like, or, like, I was just like, like my entire attitude at that time is just show up and see what happens, right? And
Let me
so,
understand what
yeah.
your living conditions are at this point. So you asked your parents if they'd give you time. Now it's been 3 years of
Yeah.
time, and are you supplementing your income continuously freelance? Does having a day job enter in ever with Louisiana, or when what happens when you go
No.
to Portland? Does day job
No.
require?
In Louisiana, no, it didn't. Basically, what happened was my parents were in a situation where they had paid off that house, and they were like, they were back and forth between Lake Charles and Baton Rouge constantly because my dad was working in Baton Rouge at the time, and so they're like, well, yeah, you can totally use our house, you know.
That's
I was
awesome.
like, okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I will say, like, for me, I'm very grateful for both of my parents because they've been ridiculously supportive of me being an artist. To the point where I'm like, nowadays I'm like, why? Like, what was y'all saw the signals. Like, what was keeping you on board with this? But so like my father actually was like supplemented my income during that initial move to Portland.
Okay.
And he would at times even supplement even after the initial move. So like, he just wanted to see me succeed in comics because he saw that I had something.
Yeah.
And he saw that it was something that I was really passionate about. So like, he was just like, if this is what you want to do, I will help you. That's just want to see you focus on something, you know? And
you get into Periscope after just 4 months, and like you said, I think possibly the right attitude, because I had about the same attitude. I think because I did the internship before you, that I didn't really expect anything. I was just so happy to be there.
Yeah.
But I'm curious for you, and this is jumping ahead. It's a 3-month period. When you came out of it, did you feel that you had got something? Obviously, you got some color work with Plants vs. Zombies.
Yeah.
But other than that, do you feel like the internship helped you in some way that gave you?
Oh, I definitely remember noticing like my drawing ability was markedly different from when I started.
That's awesome. In a 3-month period, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, well, and I remember doing an incredible amount of stuff during that period. I was doing a lot of illustrations. Like, I was doing a lot of my own stuff, but then also just, like, going through all the, like, mentorship tutorials, like you and Ron Chan and Ron Randall and Steve Lieber and everybody else was doing, like, just gave me a lot to think about. And just being in that environment gave me a lot. It was a lot to soak in because it was a very, like, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if you had the same experience with Periscope, but I just remember, like, every time I was there, I felt very locked in to what I was doing. And I didn't feel like I didn't feel any kind of hesitance. I was just like, okay, yeah, I'm here to draw. I'm here to make stuff. I'm here to, like, grow as an artist. And there was always somebody who I could, like, show my stuff to and get feedback on. And even when I wasn't asking for it, people were like would happily give feedback and just be like, notice stuff and point things out. And like, it was, I still look back really fondly on that.
That's good.
Because
awesome.
It was, I would say it was one of the most impactful, like, moments for me as an artist, because it was a place where I could see other artists at work and not feel like I'm totally insane. Like, because, you know, we're like the 3 years prior, just working by myself in my parents' house, like, it's kind of the mad scientist sort of vibe where it's like, I don't know why I'm doing this. I don't know if this is going to work out.
Yep.
Yeah.
Now, what I don't recall was that you were doing Garage Raja. Did you consistently produce Garage Raja while you were in the internship? Because I don't recall anything like that. Okay.
Yeah, I was... and I think because I was only doing like 3 pages a week, I would work on those pages, and then at the same time, that was when I was, okay, I'm trying to remember the timeline properly, but during that time, I know I did at least 1 2-page short story just as a proof of concept of like my storytelling abilities. And then I was beginning, for whatever reason, to get the ideas for Trailer Park Warlock, and I was starting to like write that down, and I was starting to sketch that out. And on top of all that, I was doing like these other just like fan art illustrations as just ways of thinking about like, oh, maybe I can make some income or put it up on DeviantArt or whatever.
Yeah.
Right. And I was doing, I mean, I feel like I know I was doing at least one like complete illustration in a comic page almost every day. It seemed like it was almost every day because I was also doing that on the weekends too.
Nice.
And you know, I mean, like being at Periscope, it's easy to go beyond just a normal work day, right? And just go, I'll just stay, you know, till 10 tonight, you know, and just get whatever I can get done, which was a really cool feeling. Like there were days where I felt like I went way above what I was expecting. Like I just knocked it out of the park today, you know, and that kind of boost in confidence snowballed itself into other projects. And I think that extra energy was sort of what became Trailer Park Warlock over time, because I was starting to like having part was having conversations with you, because I remember having a couple of conversations about animation stuff. And at the time, regular show was like a pretty big thing that was happening. And I was really into a regular show, and I liked the format of that show. I liked the like 11-minute, like, here's a self-contained thing. I mean, going back to like Freakazoid Animaniacs days, but like there was something about that format that was kind of popping back in my mind. And so I was starting to think about really heavily like, okay, I want to make my own story. How do I want to format this in a way where, because I'm now starting to think about time management as a skill, as an artist, right? So if I'm going to make my own story, I need to think about like, what can I do in a way that I know is accomplishable in a decent amount of time? I mean, it was like I was thinking in quarters. So like every 3 to 4 months, I would have like a 16-page story done. That was the idea for the initial thing for Trailer Park Warlock. And so the very first episode, I can't remember if I finished it during that internship or if it was after the internship, but I know I remember showing it to at least Ron Randall and Steve Lieber to get their feedback. And I'm pretty sure this was during the internship. It was like at the tail end.
And this is the chapter 1. Like if you go, the one I would read on Webtoons right now.
Yep.
That's awesome.
Yep.
Okay, that's cool.
And I definitely remember showing it to them and getting their feedback on it. And then from that point, I was like, okay, I'll just keep doing this over the next couple of years.
Okay,
right?
so this is exactly, I want to lock in once again on where your brain is at. So the internship is only 3 months. 3 months go by. You are living in this city. You've had what sounds like a good experience. Where is your brain when those 3 months are over? What are you thinking? Aside from that, you're going to work on Trailer Park Warlock. How is this?
Oh yeah, I had no idea how anything was going to connect after that. I was just like, okay, hope this works out. Like I hope, like I'm once again back into the mindset of like, okay, I need to like just try and start going to comic book conventions, selling stuff, you know, building out my repertoire. Like I did not, once again, I was in that place of like, fingers crossed, hope it works out, right?
So where does Garage Raja finish? When do you guys stop working on it? What time period does
it's about 2012, 2000. Oh no, maybe it was 2014 actually. Now
Okay, so you're doing Garage Raja. You come out of the Periscope. You're keep doing Garage Raja, and you're gonna do 16 pages every quarter of Trailer Park Warlock. That's roughly your big goals at the time. Okay.
Yeah.
And obviously you do it because Trailer Park Warlock is now 150 or more chapters. So okay. So you're in a good position where your parents are able to help you out. You've come out of this thing. You've got these two different things going. Obviously you're not in Portland anymore, as I understand it. So when does that like, okay, this is no longer, or are you still in Portland?
I was still in Portland at that time.
Well,
so like
when do you leave it? When does Portland stop being a place you want to be?
That was 2018.
Okay.
So 2018 through 2019. And that was a lot of different factors. So like I was in a very difficult relationship that came to an end around that time, and that was a big factor in like my decision making for that. But also like there were a lot of things going on in Portland at that time that were starting to make Portland feel a little bit unsafe and like a difficult place to live, you know?
Yeah.
Like I was over, like rent was getting expensive, you know, there was a lot of political stuff going on. It was just like one of those things where I was starting to really think like, this seems like a good idea to just like move back to Louisiana, you know?
And the reason why I'm really interested about it, why I keep asking about those things, is that when you do create your own project that isn't necessarily bringing in money, especially right off the bat, you're having to live somehow. And so the fact that you were able to consistently create over these years is what I'm interested in, is how you... So while you're in Portland, up to that moment where you move, is there ever a time period where you have to go off and do a day job that isn't related to creativity?
There was a good 3-year chunk between, oh gosh, what years were those? That was 2000, I want to say 2016 to 2018.
Okay.
And I was still doing Plants vs. Zombies, but I'd gotten to the point as a colorist where I was like, it didn't actually take up that much of my time. But at that time so let me think about this timeline. 2012-ish to 2015. That was when I was making like the very first 10 episodes of Trailer Park Warlock. Okay. So it was like 160 pages, fully colored, lettered, all that stuff, right? At the same time, I'm doing Plants vs. Zombies. I'm living with roommates, partners, like just kind of like trying to minimize my billing as much as possible, kind of a thing. And using like the Plants vs. Zombies money as like a way to support myself.
Your living expenses. And now let me just throw it out there. I would count that as the day job, right? Because that's not what you're passionate
about. Oh yeah.
That's
for sure.
Yeah.
I will say, it's funny though. I will say like it was a day job, but the amount of experience that I gained from it was like, I would not have been able to do Trailer Park Warlock without that experience.
Yeah, it's the best type of day job in some ways, where it's, you know, because that's ultimately how I came to feel about drawing comics for other people and animation, was that was a day job. But it is still the best day job in some ways. But also because, and now I'm throwing a little bit of my thing in here, where it's an illusion of, meaning that it's so close to what you want to do, but it's not. And so you can, it gets confusing a little bit. Anyway, so it's awesome that you have Plants vs. Zombies providing you the best possible day job for living expenses, and allowing you obviously enough creative juice to be producing Trailer Park Warlock. Now, when Garage Raja stops, is it just Trailer Park Warlock from that point out?
I was going to say yes, but actually no. I was doing another comic with Austin called Bat Monster. Okay. And that was once again me thinking format-wise, like, okay, what is a format that I could do this in that is minimal drain on my energy, right? Because at that point I was kind of thinking about, I do need to focus a lot of my energy on Plants vs. Zombies. And I was still thinking about wanting to do more Trailer Park Warlock, but that wasn't really quite working out at that time. So Bat Monster was kind of this... it was a weird experimental comic that me and Austin did together, where I would draw like 3-panel strips and send them to Austin, and Austin would do the dialogue. And so we would do it as like, it was basically like the Stan Lee method, where I was just like Jack Kirby, kind of like I'm basically coming up with a story, and then Austin just creates the words to go with it, and then we go from there. But that was, like I said, it was a kind of we maybe did I would do a couple of strips a week, maybe 3 strips a week, something like that. And it was just kind of one of those things that for me was keeping me kind of creatively sane a little bit, because it helped me feel like I'm making something that is contributing to my own personal portfolio as an artist.
Yes.
Even though it was, as a story, it's not something that I feel particularly strong about necessarily. Like, it's kind of I'm surprised when people say they like it. I'll put it that way.
You know, for me, drawing comics and then working in animation was so demanding of both my creative time and energy that I didn't do any kind of outside personal work. So at the very least, Bat Monster is you're exercising that muscle, you're growing that skill, and you're satisfying some. Because there was a moment in 2013 where I was like almost manic with this like need to prove that I, as a creator, existed somehow still inside my soul. And so I grabbed my sketchbook and I desperately drew out this 1-page comic, you know, but like it was like I would have exploded if I hadn't, you know, like, so Bat Monster was, you know.
Yeah, no, it was like a journal, basically. Yeah. That's the best way I describe it, is as a journal, because it doesn't look anything like a journal if, like, you know, if somebody reads it, but for me it was just like a way for me to just draw something that was not affiliated with Plants vs. Zombies or anything else, you know. It was just like my own like personal space that go ahead.
Back up real quick to the inception of Trailer Park Warlock, and more so about, so you've been doing Garage Raja as a webcomic for years at this point, and when you think I'm going to do Trailer Park Warlock, is your intention in 2012 to do it just like you're doing Garage Raja? I mean, you start a website, you do a webcomic, or do you have a different idea of how you're going to put this out into the world?
Yeah, so those first 10 episodes of Trailer Park Warlock I actually published on the Garage Raja site as just like an additional thing. It was just like, oh, here's something I'm working on, you know, on my own, as just like another thing that was going on. And that like, when I finished publishing it, I kind of like, when I did those initial 160 pages, it was like, in the way that I had written it, it was such that it was self-contained, so that I could be happy. Like, I was just like, okay, it's done. If this is all that ever becomes of it, that's fine. I can live happy with that, right? And I did. And I don't know if this would be going too far to go into like the transition into Webtoon, but this is like the real heart of what I wanted to dig in with you, because you know, so the whole goal that I'm going down is the creator own path for myself now, right? And you've been doing this for such a long time, and so I'm fascinated in what you used to do and what ultimately you have transformed into, that you feel is working for you. Hopefully you feel so. Absolutely. So you're starting as a supplement to Garage Raja, and when do you decide, all right, this isn't the right pathway for what my stuff? And that was happening with Garage Raja, that was happening all at the same time when I was doing Plants vs. Zombies, and it was becoming a thing of like, well, I can either pay my bills or I can work on Garage Raja. I didn't want to like halfway it, because I was trying to honor the amount of energy that both me and Austin had put into it, and to me it didn't feel right to just like kind of work on it from then on, when we had such a big scope of it. And I had, you know, I mean, in Periscope I had heard a lot of people talk about like, you got to be careful about that first epic, because that can really chew up a lot of your creative energy, a lot of your opportunities. And I was starting to really take that to heart. And I could also, I mean, for Austin too, there were a lot of areas where he wanted to like grow and venture out. And he had his own like life saga that he had been going through. And so I had come to this point where I was like, I had to pull the plug on it, where it's like, because I was the one who was doing all the drawing and the lettering and everything else. It's like, I think we have to stop this, because like, I don't see how we're going to be able to finish the story at this pace, right? With everything that's going on in our lives. And he agreed, and he, you know, like, we were both like sad about it, right? Like, we were both, because we had kind of put our like in a lot of ways we had kind of put our life dreams into it for a while, you know?
Yeah, you've been
And
doing it for years, which is unbelievable. Most people flake out after.
oh yeah, we went way farther into that than most people would, and I'm glad that I did, in the sense that it allowed me to really cut my teeth at comics making. But at the same time, like, I look back at it a little bit with a certain amount of regret, where I wonder sometimes if, like, maybe both me and Austin would have benefited from having stopped a little sooner, or had thought differently about how we were writing and being more self-contained, you know?
Right.
Because there's just still a part of me that thinks about, oh, it'd be great to write like a self-contained version of that, because I like those characters a lot. I still think about them from time to time.
Yeah.
I think about that world from time to time. But the point being is, like, you know, there was a point where we were just like, we can't do this anymore. And we're clearly veering off in different directions. And the money aspect being what it was, like, we needed to start really making decisions for taking care of ourselves.
Well, yeah, there's a good
direction.
So, you know, in Periscope, there were a couple people who had who were building their own careers with their webcomics and stuff. You know, they didn't work for mainstream comics; they did their own thing. And I'm curious. So by the time, you know, Garage Raja has been going consistently for a few years in 2012, where are you guys at in terms of what you felt that you had not? I mean, monetarily, absolutely, but in building an audience that you were aware of, and you know, like, did you ever see it paying off in some way?
That was the other aspect of it too, is there just wasn't much of an audience.
Gotcha.
Like, it really felt like we were screaming into the void for years. Like, years. Like, for me, I don't know what it is about my mentality. It didn't faze me that much. And I think Periscope Studio helped a lot, because, like I said, that was the first moment in a long time where I was like, oh, I'm not insane. Like, there are people who are actually doing this. Like, it is possible, right? Whereas for Austin, like, he never really got to see that. And he never really had that connection. And it did, like, I think it did drag on both of us psychologically after a while, where it's like, and I will say too, the other thing, that my biggest mistake was that I was adamantly wanting to do that comic in black and white. And I still don't know why I stuck to that decision, because now I'm like, because now I mean, having been paid to be a colorist, I had this moment of like, oh, color's actually this huge strength that I had that I never capitalized when I was making Garage Raja. That would have made the comic probably look better, would have drawn more eyes to it. Like, in a lot of ways, I was making decisions for myself that were kind of negatively impacting myself.
Yeah.
And I think for me, I was very stuck on this idea of like, I want to become a good enough of a black and white artist that I can attract eyes through just black and white line art, because that appeal, you know, like I love artists like Bill Watterson, Douglas TenNapel, like people like Sean Gordon Murphy is another one who I really like, who's just like, they have an impeccable ability to express so much with a brush.
Yeah.
And I always wanted to try and get towards that, not realizing or not recognizing that it may have not been my strength. And it took me a long time to come to that realization. And that realization didn't come about probably, I would say that's a little bit after the Periscope internship was when it started to dawn on me. And there was feedback. I still think about this a lot. There's feedback Steve Lieber gave me that he had compared me to like an alternative comics artist who I'm not going to say the name of. I don't want to be rude to that artist. He has his own, you know, credit where credit is due. But like, he had compared me to this artist, and he was like, "But you're a lot better than him." And I was like, I don't know if that's a compliment or not. And it kind of like slowly dug into my skull, where I was just like really thinking about what he was saying. And I was like, okay, maybe I'm not going to get to being the artist I want to be at the route that I've been thinking about. And maybe I need to think about this more in think about it more as a animation director, if that makes sense. Which is how I was thinking about Trailer Park Warlock. I was starting to think about like I was starting to think about layouts. I was starting to think about like storytelling from the perspective of like, what if this were to become an animated story, right? Like, and thinking about it in a more storyboarding oriented way, where it's less about, you know, is this going to be original artwork that's sellable, and more about like, am I telling the story? Am I getting it out there? Am I doing it within the timeline that I need? Am I for myself fulfilling the creative requirement of actually just telling a story and telling it well? And that was a seed that got planted but took years to evolve.
Well,
like,
so that's a great, all of that stuff. So when Garage Raja, when you decide to pull the plug, now all of that you just said, how does that, where does Trailer Park Warlock, because it has to be taken off as supplementary material and become its own thing. So how do you make that decision? When and how do you execute?
That decision didn't get made until 2018. So like basically 2015 or 2016 till 2018, I didn't touch Trailer Park Warlock at all. I just kind of assumed it finished. I had printed a a 16.
It was always supplementary material to the Garage Raja. It was all, that's where its home was. Okay.
Yeah, that's where its home was for the longest time, and
Gotcha.
like I would do things like I made like a 16-page like printed floppy of the very first story that I would sell at comic conventions, and I thought about doing that for the other stories, but I didn't at that time have like the courage or the confidence really to go that far, because I just was always so like worried about spending the money to print that and all that stuff, and worrying whether or not it would actually like be able to, like, if I would make the money back on printing and all this other stuff. Yeah.
So if that time period is if that time period is Trailer Park Warlock sort of in stasis,
yeah,
and you're focusing on Bat Monster, what is Bat Monster? Where are you posting that at? How is that? Are you putting that in the world, or
what did I do? That's a really good question, because I'm trying to remember. I think that I was just, me and Austin were just treating it as our personal journal at that time. We weren't sharing it at all at that time, and there was no plan. It was just like, we're making this, maybe one day we'll find a publisher somehow, who knows, you know.
Gotcha.
Once again, going back to that running theme of just like going head in first and just hope it works out, right? So what had happened in 2018 is I had kind of vaguely heard about Webtoon, but didn't really know a lot about it. And I had a friend from SCAD by the name of Joe. I had actually collaborated with him a bit in the past, and we would talk back and forth throughout the years. But one day he messaged me on Instagram. He was like, "Hey, have you heard of Webtoon? Like, this seemed like a pretty cool publishing platform. Like, Trailer Park Warlock would be perfect for this." And I looked at it and I was curious, and they were doing like their at the time they were doing these called discovery contests. So like basically, you know, publish your comic. I'm kind of Tokyo Pop Rising Stars of Manga kind of thing, but basically like publish on Webtoon, you know, people will check it out, and then editors will make a decision as to whether or not we want to like do something with it, right? So like I publish it on Webtoon, and this was the very first time that I had gotten like just strong feedback from readers, where it was like numerically obvious, where it was just like, oh, this is way more people who like it than I thought would like it. People actually replying and responding to this. Like, I was in a weird place in my life at that time, but it was just like this very surreal moment of like, because for a long time I was like, I feel like Trailer Park Warlock's actually pretty decent, but like there was never enough feedback for me to feel confident about it. And then this was that first time where I was like, oh, like people do actually really like it. I wasn't just like, once again, I was like, I'm not crazy. Like, there's actually something here, you know?
And did you, because it's completed at this point, did you just mass upload the whole thing, or did you have a release schedule?
What did I do? So I formatted it for the Webtoon format, which was basically like, you know, I basically just like going in Photoshop and copy pasting it into the vertical strip.
Scroll, yeah.
Yeah, and then like, I would upload it. I think I uploaded an episode every week.
Okay.
Based on that, kind of how, because I think that was how the contest worked. Is like just release an episode every week, and then we'll go based off of that feedback. And so it was after 10 weeks that it was really obvious to me that like, oh, I could just build an audience on my own this way if I kept making it, right? At that time, it would have been very difficult to do. And like, I didn't.
What does that mean right there? So you said I could build an audience if I kept making it. At that time, it was difficult to do. What does both of that mean? What do you mean?
Because at that time, like, I was still working on Plants vs. Zombies, and I had a bunch of life stuff going on that I don't want to go too deep into, but it was something that there was a lot of stuff taking up my time.
Gotcha.
In such a way that it did not make sense to, like, once again get back onto, like, the webcomic, like, timeline, if that makes sense. The time management frame of mind, where it's like, I've got to meet these, specific standards of time. I got to get these releases, et cetera, et cetera.
Gotcha.
And then what was the other? Was there another aspect?
No, let's just power forward.
Okay, yeah. So what happened was I didn't place at all in the discovery contest.
I was curious about that.
I got like an honorable. I got like what do they call that? Like an honorable mention or whatever.
Yeah, let me throw it in real quick because see, when I look at Webtoons, Trailer Park Warlock does not fit into their aesthetic.
No, not at all.
And that's what I was curious about. Is that first of all, it's great to see that you're getting people enjoying it in a way that you can measure really for the first time. But especially from then up until now, what do you feel like Trailer Park Warlock is just an oddball on that site? Do you feel like you've seen other, like, has it become something that feels like it should?
Well, so Webtoon today versus Webtoon in 2018 are two very different animals. And I will say there was a strong focus on like romance comics and stuff even at that time. But at that time, they were still in the shotgun mode of like, we're just finding our audience, right?
Gotcha.
And they had decided that I was a good fit for their attempt to explore into like American sort of more masculine audience, right?
Okay.
So like Webtoon's demographic breakdown, and this has maybe changed, but at least at the time, my editors were telling me that it's a 60-40 split female to male. So like very much the focus was more on high school, college age women. So like you're saying, like Trailer Park Warlock is this weird fit in that. Like it doesn't make any kind of sense at all. But I think for Webtoon at that time, they were like, we can make a small bet on this horse, basically, to like see if it goes somewhere.
But
maybe.
What does that mean? So first of all, it's really cool that you were getting some sort of editorial feedback on like demographics and stuff like that they're talking to you. What does that mean though? A small bet. What do they want to do with you?
They want to see. To me, it's obvious that they wanted to see if they could build out a development deal from Trailer Park Warlock.
Okay.
Like, see if it would take off with an audience. See if they could get it to turn into like an animation and all this other stuff. That's where they wanted to go with it, and they might still want to go with it. Who knows? Like that's kind of up in the air right now.
Okay.
But they were willing to at least put forward enough money to like support me as an artist to just finish the story front to back. And I will say, like, the story ended up being shorter than I wanted it to be because they basically kind of gave me a point where they were like, we need you to finish it out within this framework. And that was probably like in 2020, I want to say. And that was around the time when they were starting to veer more like, we need to be romance comic heavy.
Gotcha. So they've tried this direction and they feel like it's not fair. So, okay, this is very interesting. So, I think I misunderstood. When you had put, when Trailer Park Warlock was finished in 2015 on the Garage Raja website, I thought you were merely just taking that and uploading it, but you're actually adding new material during the Webtoon days when they offer you this
Yeah. Well, I added only a little bit in that re-upload. I'll just call it the re-upload when I put it on Webtoon. But like, changing the format changed the way I had to tell the story too, because I had to think differently about like how things were being paced, right? Like there's an episode where like a character falls down a well, right? And it's like a black abyss kind of a thing. And I played with that on the vertical scroll, and I just like let it kept going. Like there were people who read that episode and are like, I thought that my phone bugged out that went on so long. And for me, I was like, I just wanted to play with that gag, but like I did try and make I tried to fit it to make the format work with it, right?
So that was already a story that you had created, but now you're adding and adjusting and getting to find ways to better tell some of the story through that vertical. Okay, so that's interesting. So when they say that they're gonna basically give you some money to finish it out, that's really not necessarily so much you creating new chapters, but you
Well, I should say that. So the very first 10 episodes, well, that was like quote unquote season 1, right? And there were 5 seasons in total. So they wanted to see how season 1 did. They liked how season 1 did. That was a very easy season because I did add some stuff to the very first episode. And I added a couple little things here and there throughout some of the other episodes. And ended up turning 10 episodes into 18 episodes. Just because of the way that it was paced out.
Yeah.
Because they wanted it to work in a way where they could make it into as close to like a 23-week
now when
season.
so you jump in because this part of this like this discovery competition contest.
Yeah.
And at what point does anyone start communicating with you from the Webtoons editorial? Because are you just choosing at first, like, I'll just put an episode up a week? And when did they come in and start saying this whole idea about we want 23 weeks?
Oh, it was a couple weeks. It was a couple weeks after the contest was over.
Okay.
Like, I kind of just assumed that it was done, you know? And, excuse me, real quick. I just kind of assumed it was done and that would be it. And then an editor reached out to me from Webtoon and was like, oh, we would like to actually, like, make this a serial. Like, we would like to take what you have and then let you continue going on with the story if you want. And I was like, I was on board, you know, because the page rate at the time was really good and it seemed like a pretty good fit for me, you know, like I and looking back on it now, like you couldn't, I mean, other than the page rate could be way better now, but like you couldn't ask for a better like editorial situation in the sense that they were so hands off.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Like mostly what they wanted was just to make sure that you weren't doing things that they would have to censor. And that only ever happened for me once. Like there was one thing where it was like, there's an episode way like in season 3 or 4 where like Jake is like a ghost and he's like he's ghost naked. So like I was just like, I'll draw his butt, you know, because it's his ghost butt. It's not really his butt, whatever. But they wanted me to like take out the crack of the butt because that's too suggestive. And I was like, okay, fine. I mean, if that's the one, that's not bad. If that's the one thing you're going to ask from me, then that's fine. I can live with that.
And when they're asking you to do episodes, what is their release date with such a thing? What do they want from you?
They wanted me to do 1 episode a week.
Okay. So that's basically what you were doing.
Yeah, and the way they had it set up was like, at least at that time, I don't know if it's still like this now, but at that time it was, we want you to have time to make your buffer, but we want you to be on 1 a week as best as you can. And then once you hit a certain number of buffer, and it was usually like 12 or 14 episodes, then we'll start releasing, and then you just like finish out the season from that momentum that you've built up. And that generally worked out. There were a couple of seasons where I had to go on like a 2-week hiatus or 4-week hiatus. That was like at the tail end where I was starting to I was getting very ambitious and just I was getting into this mindset of like, okay, if this is the last thing I ever make, I want to make it count, kind of a thing. So
this is all really exciting. I didn't know. I just thought you were uploading to Webtoons. I didn't know that you had gotten involved with Webtoons. It's very exciting.
Well, and it's a very the situation I was in was really cool in that it's very similar to like a Mike Mignola kind of situation with Dark Horse, where it's like he retains ownership of.
That's what I was curious
rights,
about. Yeah.
Right, but he still he basically has Dark Horse as a business partner. It's the same situation with me with Webtoon, where it's like Webtoon is the business partner on this, and they're helping me out with this property, but they also funded like me making the property basically.
Yeah.
And as far as I'm aware, they made their money back on it, right? So like I'm gonna disavow myself of any guilt on that like level. Like I don't but for me also it's helped me build an audience that has been able to allow me to like build out my next series. And while it's a smaller audience than what Trailer Park Warlock had, it's at least something that I can start with, and that is more than I've ever had in my life at this point.
All right, so let me dig in to the end, to the finale of Trailer Park Warlock. So they at 2020, I believe, is when they say we'd like you to wrap this up, right?
Yeah.
To end the series.
Yeah.
And so is it 2020, and then what do you do from that point? What's the
Yeah, it's funny that was the point when they asked me, but I didn't finish until last year.
Oh.
So it was still 3 years after that.
Now, is that uploading one episode a week still on that format?
Yeah. And so like I gave them a number of like how many episodes I could do it in, because they were just like, tell us how many episodes you think you could do it in. And it's a really interesting situation because it was kind of a poker situation. It was like, what's too much, what's too little,
yeah,
like what's just right. So I asked for it was about 51 or 60 episodes, and in my mind I was just like, oh, that'll be about a year, 2 years. It ended up being 3 years, and that was just based on like the pace in which I was working, and also like I was getting more ambitious at that time. And also, like, COVID was happening, so I was also in this mindset. Like, I had moved back to Louisiana, and I was living with my mom and my sister. And it was COVID, and I was like, well, okay, this being the situation that it is, we might be like this for who knows how long. Just get comfortable with it and just try and make as much good material as you can with this situation. Because I'm just trying to make the best of a weird situation. I'm able to save money. I'm able to I'm able to make the best of a bad situation, basically, right?
Yeah.
And so I decide at that point, like, I'm gonna make every season of Trailer Park Warlock as better as I can than the last. And there's a very marked difference between season 1 and season 5 in terms of my drawing ability, in terms of my coloring ability, in terms of my comfort with the medium. Like, I just made sure that I was able to push myself as best as I could, because
it's super exciting. Now, so you play this poker game. Do they accept?
They do accept. They don't argue again. Because originally I was okay. Just to throw numbers, I was like, let's say 120.
Okay.
You know, and I was like, oh, that's a lot. So I pegged it down by a half, and then added a little bit. So it was around 50 to 65. I can't quite remember what number I gave them, but they were totally fine with that number. And I think it was because, I don't know this, I'm kind of speculating, but I think it was because for them, they were making money from the title by hosting the title right on their site, but the audience wasn't growing at the exponential rate that they wanted. So they looked at it as, well, this isn't going to hit like the revenue marker that we want. So we're just going to let this creator finish out the title. We'll still be able to, like, you know, get our value out of it, right? And he'll be able to get the value of the audience out of it. And then that'll just be that, right? Like, that'll be the deal, basically. And part of the reason that happened too is because in season 2, Season 2 was very different from season 1.
Mm.
Season 2, I took it into a more of a cinematic route. It was still very comedic and humorous, but like the story started to get very complex and very like heavy and philosophical in areas. And unfortunately, because of the way that Webtoon had organized it as its thing organized, like I wasn't aware of like how much audience I was losing during that time.
Mm.
And I don't know if I would have done it differently, because season 2 I actually look at as my favorite season. It's like, I think it's my best writing. It's not necessarily my best artwork, but it's my best writing, and it's my like most ambitious version, I think, of what I was going for out of all of those seasons. But regardless, like what had happened was I was just losing a lot of audience.
When did you learn that? If you're not learning that in the moment,
yeah, because I didn't have charts to look at or anything, right? I didn't have any data analytics to look at. So,
but when does it come? When do you how do you
halfway through that season? My editor is like, "We're kind of concerned about how much of an audience you're losing, so we really, for the next season, we want you to go veer back more towards something that was like season 1."
Gotcha.
And so that was not. I was kind of preparing for that a little bit, but I wasn't. I was in that place where I was like, I don't know, maybe I'm not losing an audience. Maybe I am. I don't know. I just noticed that people were responding less. You know, there were less responses than previously. It's all very relative, right? Like less is like, maybe in season 1 it was 200, but in this season it's like 150, right?
Right.
But it's not growing. And so that was what was tipping off the Webtoon staff.
Gotcha.
And so, interestingly enough, like later seasons, the audience did regrow from that. And people came back to read it and were like, "Oh, I love this season. I stepped out of it because it was getting too complicated. But then I came back a year later and I really loved it." And I was like, well, that would have been nice if you were there then.
Yeah.
But anyway.
So let me, what's all of this is so exciting, because I mean, this is the stuff that I think actually matters. You know, you are living and dying by your creation, right?
Sure.
And when it comes to the, like, you know, you could tell that you're getting less comments, it's not growing, but I'm curious, because I know very little bit about Webtoons. I'm kind of learning about it for the first time, really. That you have subscriber. How do they know that the reader, like, you're just there? Like, I guess I'm curious, like, if you have any idea about this, how are they knowing that you're losing readership? Right?
Because they have access to the analytics. And so it's very screwy the way Webtoon's organized, in the sense that, so for comparison, like right now I'm publishing my current title on Webtoon Canvas. It's still technically Webtoon, but they have Canvas and Webtoon, and are the Webtoon originals, I'll say. The Webtoon originals are the artists that they are personally funding to make their titles.
Okay, and so Canvas
is people who are just uploading their own stuff.
Gotcha. Okay.
So like, if you're on Webtoon Canvas, you get a certain amount of analytics. You get to know how many people are showing up every week to read your comic, and you get sort of a monthly idea of how many people are reading. If you're an original artist, they do not give you access to that information for some reason.
Yeah,
and I don't.
Weird.
It's very weird, and
especially if you like transitioned over. You're like you've been paying attention to your analytics, and you've been making sure that you're doing good, and then all of a sudden you go into that's a weird choice.
I think it's a mistake on Webtoon's organizational point, but I think the way that they organize it is, if we are funding a thing, we want to have as much control over it as we can.
Sure.
As part of that, like, give and take of like, oh, I get full rights on my thing, but because this is your platform, you're going to control whatever you can that is the platform's.
Sure, that makes sense.
Stuff.
And you're giving you had so much creative freedom, which I assume hopefully still be at play. All right, let me explore real quick with this idea. So they ask you to wrap up Trailer Park Warlock. You give them a number that takes up to just last year, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
And then you have since started you have your new series that you have current now, but was there a series between, or is it Trailer Park Warlock ends and you start the new series that's on?
And then I started the new series, which is The Legend of Redneck.
Okay,
so yeah, what are you gonna say?
Well, I saw on Patreon that you have something going on over there. Another title.
Oh, that's true. Okay, that's on pause. So I had another title called Mega Geo Brothers. Okay, let me try and explain myself. When I was coming towards the end of Trailer Park Warlock, I was getting back into that mode of like shotgun. Like I need to figure out what to do next, because it was becoming obvious to me that like Webtoon was probably not going to sign me on for another title, at least not anytime soon.
Yeah.
And partially that's because they have zeroed in very heavy on like their core demographic of like very anime oriented action, romance, that kind of stuff. But at the same time, I had the advantage of I do have readers on the Webtoon platform. I should probably not just throw that away, right?
Definitely.
And so in my mind, I'm like, I'm going to do 2 stories at once, right? But do it in a way where it's like smaller bite-sized chunks, because in my mind, it seemed like reader attention has deteriorated a lot since I started Trailer Park Warlock. Like reader attention seems like it's better at smaller comics. Like originally for Legend of Redneck, originally I was thinking about 6 panels. It's a 12 panel episode, and I do 2 a week, right?
So is that how you measure the episode for like Trailer Park Warlock? You count it as panels?
Yes.
So what would the average Trailer Park Warlock panel count be?
The average was okay. I would say on average it was about 45 panels. So it came out to be about 5 to 8 pages, depending on how full those pages are. Whereas what I'm doing now is more Legend of Redneck is more 2 pages, like 2 6-panel pages, right? So on top of that, I was going to do another comic, and I am doing it technically, called Mega Geo Brothers, which was me taking going back. Remember that comic that I was talking about called Geotech, right?
I was wondering about this.
I was taking those characters and then just making a whole other thing, right? More as just me revisiting sort of my childhood influences and kind of once again sort of journaling a little bit, and also just thinking about, okay, if I were to make like an all ages centered comic, like something that could be published in Scholastic or whatever, something to potentially send to a book agent or whatever. This would be that title.
Cool.
And then start by releasing it on Patreon as just like something that is a Patreon exclusive thing. I've gotten 100 pages into that, and then in December I hit a wall with that story in the sense of I couldn't keep up with the pace of it. And I decided, okay, I'm just going to focus on my current thing, The Legend of Redneck, which I have a definitive end for, finish that, and then I'll get back to Mega Geo Brothers and finish that out, because I had like 40 to 50 pages to finish, but I didn't want to just like... I was getting to a place where I felt like I was... I don't know, I'm sure you're probably familiar with this, where you're just like putting stuff on the page and you don't really feel like you're really... Like I didn't feel like I was really connecting with what I was drawing, And when I started to hit that point, I was like, I should stop drawing this right now and come back to it later, because I'm probably going to have rewrites. There's probably some things missing here, and I'm just not giving it my full attention. And I should put my full attention into the title that I know is building an audience and like actually getting feedback pretty regularly, and people actually like subscribe to the Patreon to see more of. So like, because the way that I have the Patreon set up, it's like if you want to read ahead of the story that I have on Webtoon, you subscribe to the Patreon to like read the buffer basically, because there's a pretty substantial amount of episodes that are uploaded on Patreon that you can't read anywhere else right now. So anyway, so my objective now is to finish out Legend of Redneck, which is going to be around 150 episodes.
And where are you at right now?
I'm on episode 50. I started 52 today.
Okay, so got considerable work to go.
Yeah, I mean, it's a considerable amount of work to go, and it's a considerable amount of work already in. Mm-hmm. And I'm in that place where it's like, okay, I'm locked in. Like, let's see it through. I know how this goes.
With something like that, okay, so Trailer Park Warlock is coming to an end. Do you wait to start Legend of Redneck, or do you start it before Trailer Park Warlock ends?
I'm waiting. So as Trailer Park Warlock was starting to come to an end, I was starting to do like sketching and like coming up with story ideas, because there were other story ideas I discarded or shelved. But I was kind of in that like zone of just like, I need to blue sky some stuff and just find what makes sense for me. Like what seems like a good project that would feel right coming out of Trailer Park Warlock, because I love Trailer Park Warlock. I love the way that it ended. I feel very confident and strong about that story altogether. But the workflow of it, the intensity of it, would put me in a place where it's like, I need to do a project that's a little more easy is not really the word I want to use, but it's kind of the word where it's just like not as energy intensive, not as time intensive. And I can kind of take more of a step back, and it has more of a comic strip format to it. It's not really a comic strip. So I would say like the way that I formatted Legend of Redneck is like, it is comic strip light in the sense that most strips are very self-contained, but there is an overall story that you can dive into if you want to. And as I've hit the 50 mark, I'm getting to this point where it's like, okay, let's get into the story and let's kind of slowly discard some of the comic strip stuff, and so that I can get myself in a place of let's finish the story. Yeah. Let's get it done. Because once again, I'm getting into this place of maybe this is the last story I tell for a while, so I want it to be good. I want to enjoy it. I want to appreciate it. I want to be able to look back on it and go, okay, I did great on that. I don't have to have any kind of regret about it, you know, like, because like right now I'm running on some side hustles and savings.
That's what I was curious about. So yeah, we're at a stage now. So when does the Plant vs. Zombie coloring gigs? No, it doesn't have to be just Plant vs. Zombie, but when do you put a close on the coloring gigs?
That was around 2017.
Okay.
2016, 2017, I want to say. Yeah.
So from that moment forward, it's been purely, like when you say side hustle, it's whatever little freelance creative related?
Yeah. So like right now, what I'm doing is I'm an editor on several books. And so it's very easy work for me, and it pays well, but it's not like amazing pay. It's like, I could probably do some other side hustles. So like, I guess the best way I can describe this is like, I've been trying to get myself into a place where I can open myself up more mentally to opportunities, because my mindset during Trailer Park Warlock was, this is it.
Yeah.
Like tunnel vision, right? And while that was really useful to writing that, I'm kind of revisiting a little bit where I was when I brought Garage Raja to an end, where it's like, I have to think about how do I make sure that my money needs are being taken care of on top of my creative needs, right? And I'm at least able to balance it better now, right? Like that was why I was thinking about The Legend of Redneck the way that I am, is like, I know that I can do at least, at the very least, I can do one episode a week if I had to pick up a day job, right?
Yeah.
I could just chip away at this in the evenings, and it's not so complex that I feel overwhelmed by it. I know that I can have something completed by the end of the week, which is a great goal for me to set, because I'm trying to think in terms of, and I guess this is how since starting Trailer Park Warlock, this is how I've been thinking about projects ever since, is like, what can I get completed, right? What can I get completed on with the resources that I have, and what is what is functional? Because life is kind of chaotic sometimes. Like, you know, at the time the page rate for Trailer Park Warlock was great, and then nowadays, like, it's not a great page rate, right?
I'm curious about that. So when you with something like Webtoon's Canvas, where they're not sponsoring you, are you making any kind of monetary
only through
income?
Patreon?
Okay,
only through Patreon at this moment. So like, good.
I want to hone in on your once again where you're at. So Trailer Park Warlock is coming to an end, and you have had experience where you've been built up a buffer with Garage Raja before launching it. But there's a different dynamic at play here, where you're losing your financial income with your own creative property. You're coming to launch into. Do you go straight? Do you create yourself a buffer before?
Oh yeah, I created a buffer again.
Okay. So
that was the strategy. Was I was going to create that buffer for it to be a Patreon add-on thing, right? And I'm still having to figure out what are other things that can be attractive to people to help support it, right? Like, this is there are comics that make Patreon work really well, and I'm still trying to figure out what those things are, right? And I'm trying to think about what are all of the other things, because now because unfortunately I can't do this with Trailer Park Warlock due to contractual agreements right now, where I cannot print volumes of Trailer Park Warlock. That right now is within Webtoon's purview, and it's not for lack of trying. I'll say that much. It's because it's just it's because of I'm trying to skirt around NDA agreement kind of stuff, but for whatever reason right now, that's not working out with Trailer Park Warlock. So with Legend of Redneck, I can build it out in such a way where at the end of this, I can do a crowdfunding campaign to print volumes, right? And I'm also thinking about potentially designing a board game as well.
Oh, interesting.
Cool. So that still feels kind of far off in the future, but those are the plans that I have. And in the meantime, rely on side hustle, rely on savings, and potentially build out other streams of revenue through day job stuff or whatever if I have to, right? But at least my mindset now is I want to be in a place where the best way I can describe this is, I think while making Trailer Park Warlock, and during that period of time, from Garage Raja to the end of Trailer Park Warlock, I had this mindset that was, if I'm not creating something that's my own, I'm wasting my time. I only have so many years of my life to be creative. I need to maximize them, right?
That's such a great mindset, in my opinion.
And I think what happened is, after Trailer Park Warlock, I kind of, a little bit of that eased off to the point where I can go, all right, I've gotten the big story out. It's out of my system, and now I can kind of do smaller stories, and I can think more in terms of, let's say, 150-page volume.
Yeah.
That doesn't seem like a lot to me anymore. That used to be a lot. That's actually not that much, what's even more interesting is 72-page volumes do really well. And so I think of okay, 72-page story. Could I do that? I haven't figured that one out yet.
Well, let me dig into that real quick. You say 72-page does well. What do you mean? Where is it doing well? On Webtoon?
I would say, I'm saying this from my experience with Plants vs. Zombies.
Gotcha.
So all of those books were 72-page volumes. They sold incredibly well.
Gotcha.
And granted, it's the audience, too. It's an all-ages story. But I think also that can translate really easily to older audiences, because once again, I'm speculating a little bit, and this is a thesis that I had, but I do think that reader attention span has deteriorated a lot from where we were like in 2011, where I think people are more overwhelmed the bigger a book looks, or the bigger a story looks.
Yeah.
And so they're less likely to engage with it. And so there's a part of me that's like, okay, the bad part of that is the big epic stories aren't going to take off as easily. The good part is that's less work on my part.
Yeah.
You know, so long as I can competently tell a story in that frame of time, which is very doable. You know, it's there's a lot. I'm surprised now what I can get done in 72 pages based on what I've gotten done with Legend of Redneck, which I've done in total basically around 100 pages now. Right.
Yeah, this is all so cool. This is what I'm talking about, is that you've gone through the hard work of mastering your craft by doing your own work, right? Like I have no idea how many pages of comics I've drawn and how many storyboards I've done, right? But almost all of that is largely useless because it was for telling bad story. Like it's not applicable to, like, I actually had to, like when I started to do Powerstars, I had to, like, I had all this poison in me that I had to, like, get out of my system.
Yeah.
Where, like, oh, right, no, I need to, this isn't, like, this is, I'm trying to do good here, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, this isn't going to hurt me if I actually spend time inside this, because that's, I was talking to a buddy yesterday, and the analogy I used was, like, it's like when you're trying to rinse dishes, and you've got scalding water, right? You're trying to keep your hands from burning, you know, or whatever, right? That's what working on those scripts and stuff was like for me. I'm trying to keep my creativity and my soul out of it as quickly, or, you know, as much as possible. Yeah. So you, by pursuing your own work, he just said, you know what you can do in 72 pages, right? You've been existing in here and in here, you know, and you can exercise that power. Whereas someone like me, who's coming to the creator-owned arena so late, it's like I'm so far in the beginning of, like, I have no idea what I can do in 70 pages, you know.
Oh, that's really interesting. I mean, that's interesting to hear, because I would have assumed that a lot of that would have translated, but
no, because what they're asking you to do, you know, like jumping back with your buddy Austin, you know, where you're like, listen, you know, I gotta change your script here because, you know, this isn't gonna work as a comic and stuff. That's you and two buddies working together. This flip side is that somebody who is a professional writer is giving me a script that literally cannot be done as a visual, you know, comic book, and so I have to do half of their job plus my job, and what they're asking for is like stupid or lame, you know, or it doesn't make sense in terms of like story or character motivation and shit. And so, like, you cannot do good when you're asked to do bad. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So I'm so interested, like, what do you feel like are the what do you feel like is the poison specifically? Like, is it sort of ways that you composite shots, or is it like
it's much more about it's much more about, so for example, if you know, a lot of comic book artists in recent history, in my, you know, from what I can see, are people who have no acting ability, no storytelling ability. They're just good draftsmen, right? And so for them, a bad script is equal as a good script because they don't have any ambition to tell story. But if you want to tell story and if you want to act, then you have to have good story to tell from, right? And so the poison comes from bad story. Like, you know, think about, you know, we can try to pick an example between the two of us, but, you know, like movies, right? There are so many bad movies that have bad stories. If you can think of one off the top of your head, go ahead.
I just watched one. Okay. Okay, I actually watched one last night that I thought was okay, but I would technically call it a bad story, which is the Guy Ritchie's Sherlock Holmes. Like, it's very what I call the Hollywood, like, cookie cutter, like, rising action, blah blah blah. You know, it's just like we're just trying to make something, within
And
within the set budget, you
yeah,
know.
and I haven't seen that movie in a while, so I can't comment to the exact story. But like you said, you thought it was fine, right?
Yeah.
Ultimately, it comes down to
It
fine.
was fine, but it was like competent, but it was like there was no soul there, for lack of a better
Yeah.
word.
So
And I
if we
feel like
take
that's
us,
what you're
no,
saying.
no, I'm saying let's take a step down
Okay.
from there. We go even
Okay.
further down where it's not
Okay.
fine, right? It's that
Okay.
this doesn't make sense. There are things that don't add up. Like the director and the writer are forcing the characters to suddenly be over here or to do this thing that doesn't make
Oh.
any sense because the
Yeah, yeah.
story, like, oh well, we have to get there, and
Yeah.
we're not going to be careful about thinking of what of how it all adds up. Like that's the kind of stuff that I'm talking
And so
about.
that kind of stuff you feel like you're unconsciously still like
Oh,
have
I'm now
in your
consciously
tool
trying to,
set?
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's because it's there. It's corrupted.
Yeah. Yeah.
It will kill you, your creative soul.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, and this is ultimately why I try to communicate with younger people nowadays. Of like, if you're the type of person that wants to write and draw your own stories, you are not going to be happy if you have to go and work on with other people's things because what you need to do is get what you have inside of you out. And there are other people who don't, they're not driven by those same desires. They just want to be good draftsmen. And so
Yeah.
you can tell them to draw anything and it's the same as long as they get to
Yeah.
make pretty lines or whatever, right?
No,
So
I relate to that a lot because that is a particular mindset that well I've always been trying to I've tried to figure out what kind of term to use for that because there were a lot of artists that I met during my time in Portland who had that mindset where it was, and there are artists who I appreciate it, right?
Sure,
Who
yeah.
like they have incredible draftsmanship. They're like they know how to meet their deadlines. They know how to get their work done. But at the same time, I look at their work and I go, it's not something that I feel compelled to like hang up on my wall, or it's like these are stories that I feel like you're just trying to meet a deadline and to get a story out. Whereas you know, like going back to my conversation when I was talking about Alan Moore, where it's like every story Alan Moore wrote, he was putting himself 100% into that story and taking deliberate creative risks every single time. To me, that is the goal. Like if you can do that and also financially sustain yourself,
Yeah,
that seems like the ideal,
yes.
right?
There's
But even
nothing
if you
better at that
can
point.
like even if you can meet yourself halfway and financially sustain yourself some other way but still creatively express yourself in a way where
See, you've hit the nail on the head where I'm at, where I was making excellent money in the animation industry, right?
Yeah.
But I was so unhappy, right? So I'm ostensibly doing what I desire, which is I am working on cartoons, I'm drawing for a living, I'm making great money, I'm in a city that's awesome. It amounted to nothing, right? So I'd much rather do exactly what you said, which is that like I'd much rather take a risk that maybe creating something like Powerstars or any of the other stuff I want to do may not ever add up to financially be able to to sustain myself, but I will work something else if I have to. I haven't had to do that yet, but I will. I will go and do something like I would love to go work at like a dog daycare center or something like that.
Yeah.
To pay the bills, to be able to do my own creative work, and that will be far better life than like it has been for the last 4 years where I primarily left the industry.
Yeah.
This has been a far better life.
That's awesome. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
That's awesome. It's hard. It's there was a long period of time in my life where I did kind of aspire towards that idea of like, oh, get a very cushy, like well-paying
Yeah, of course.
job, whether animation or whatever.
It's the right answer.
Yeah. And the more that I hear about it and hearing you talk about that, it does help validate me, like my decisions, because it's like I can go, okay, I feel good. Like even though there have been financial difficulties along this path, I feel very good about what ended up being the result of my creativity.
Amazing, incredible, because that's what I'm saying. Like you got to be recognized by your own writing and drawing, right?
Yeah.
And ultimately, it was for a platform that found its niche that didn't include something like Trailer Park Warlock. but you got to do it for a little bit, and now you'll find hopefully the next major,
Yeah.
or rather, not, I shouldn't say major, the outlet that
Right.
will allow for it to
That's kind of that has been my goal, and that's why I've been doing a lot of paintings recently. Is because this kind of I don't know. This kind of came out of nowhere, but I had watercolors sitting around and I had paper sitting around, and they were just stuff that I took out of my mom's house, and I was like, I don't want it to let it go to waste. Maybe I should just like mess around, because a part of me wants to slowly kind of veer away from doing stuff less digitally and doing stuff more analog for various reasons. One reason being I'm kind of tired of staring at screens all the time. Like that's one reason. Another reason is I have this speculative theory that due to artificial intelligence, there's a certain people are more skeptical about digital art and have more of an attraction to seeing like original art on paper, and also more willing to spend money on that, right? Because that's sort of a luxury item in a sense. So like for me, I'm looking at this, okay, well, I should use this opportunity since I have opened up this extra time and energy for myself. And it's probably very limited. I don't know how much time I have that I can do this before, I have to maybe get a day job or whatever. I'm going to use this time to work on my craft in an area that I wanted to, but never really deliberately spent the time to do that. So I started doing watercolor paintings that are just very like, honestly, like kind of Bob Rossi landscape paintings, They're very fun to do. They're very relaxing to do. And creatively very like, I would say liberating in the sense that I just don't have to think about anything doing it. It's just kind of spilling out on the page. And it's kind of reconnecting me with this fun moment of like, when I'm putting the brush to the page, I don't know how it's going to turn out. And it's that excitement of like, I don't know if this is even going to be good, and I don't care. Like, I just want it to be done, and I want it to be done in a way where I can be satisfied with it, which is so very different from the very deliberate mentality of like, you set up your webcomic page on, or not webcomic, but you set up your comic page on Photoshop or Clip Studio or whatever it is that you're using, and you're thinking about, gesturing it out and all this other stuff. And I want to try and connect more with the kind of creativity of like you see like Kim Jong-gi?
Yeah.
Like that kind of like you're just making lines and you're not entirely sure where it's going, but you're going to connect it at some point. Like I would love to be able to connect deeper with that, and this is my starting point for that. And I don't know how far that I'm going to get with that, but I know that I can at least make some paintings that I feel good about, and I don't have to feel like, is this going to be something? Yeah. I'm just like, this is a finished painting. I could put it in my portfolio. Maybe I could put this in a gallery wall somewhere, or who knows? Once again, coming back to that thread of like, let's just see where it goes. But at the very least, I know that it is fulfilling for me in the sense that I'm able to express a part of myself that I did actually kind of repress doing comics. And this isn't to be negative on comics at all, because I'm going to be doing comics as long as I have that desire to do it. And I have a pretty decent amount of desire to at least do another like 140 pages, at least right now, right? Not to mention like all the other, like the board game and all that stuff. But like, this is another mode where I can disconnect from that mindset for a little bit and connect with a different mindset. And that it allows me to then kind of take what knowledge I'm gaining from that and put it back into the comics. Because I'm already thinking differently about color now. And I'm already thinking differently about how I'm laying out pages and composition. And I'm able to be a little looser and not as like intensely like, okay, where does the foreground need to be? Where's the background? I can be a little bit more like, oh, maybe we can adjust this or that a little later on, or maybe I don't have to draw out this background. I can just paint it in or whatever. I can just use color to indicate.
To build it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is I think that's great. And I think this is also a good place to probably wrap it up right here.
Yeah.
And so in regards to everything that you've got, we've mentioned titles multiple times, but where do you want where do you want to send people to connect with you? Like, do you have a home-based website that has all the links to it? Do you have?
At this moment, sadly, no. I need
okay.
to. That's my other project for this year. But I would say if you want to find out what I'm doing, either on Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it, at Matt J Rainwater, or at Matthew Rainwater on Instagram. And that's where you can find all the links to all the stuff that I'm working on. But yeah, I mean, if you Google Trailer Park Warlock on Google, you're going to find it immediately. So, and that'll link you up with everything else that I'm doing right now.
Okay, right on. All right, well, thanks a ton for doing this, man. It's been a lot of
fun.
I
appreciate this conversation. It's been great.
Let me just stop this now real quick.